Hey there, tonight we're uncovering what shipbuilding was like in ancient Phoenicia. What you're about to discover is how these master craftsmen quietly revolutionized maritime trade while working with nothing more than hand tools and cedar wood. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun spills over the Mediterranean, casting its golden glow on the bustling port city of Tyre. Birds are chirping, vendors are shouting, and you're smack dab in the middle of the ancient world's shipping superhighway. Welcome to Tyre, where the air is thick with the scent of salt and cedar. Now, forget the romanticized vision of Phoenicians as just traders. They were the original maritime powerhouses, and today you're about to find out why their shipbuilding prowess made them the Elon Musk of the ancient seas, minus the Twitter drama. First things first, let's talk geography because, believe it or not, location was everything. Ancient Phoenicia wasn't a sprawling empire. It was more like the string of pearls stretched along the coast of what we now call Lebanon. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, these weren't just cities. They were the beating heart of a civilization that knew how to work with what Mother Nature dished out. And what she dished out was cedar. Lots and lots of cedar. The nearby mountains were like a giant Home Depot of the ancient world, stocked with the finest timber money could buy. Cedar wood was the unsung hero of shipbuilding. Why cedar, you ask? Well, it's not just about the aromatic allure, though that certainly didn't hurt. Cedar was light, strong, and resistant to the rotting effects of salty seawater. It was the perfect blend of strength and buoyancy. And here's a fun fact. The Egyptians loved it so much they'd pay top dollar, or rather, top silver, to get their hands on it for their own ships and temples. But back to the Phoenicians. These folks were the Steve Jobs of their time, focusing on sleek design and functionality. They weren't just cobbling together boats. They were crafting vessels that could outpace and outmaneuver almost anything on the water. By 1200 BCE, they were already building ships with a keel, a backbone that made their ships faster and more stable. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of adding a turbocharger to a car. And let's be honest, in a time where most people couldn't swim, you'd want a ship that wasn't prone to capsizing. Now, let's dive into the myth-busting. The Phoenicians have been pigeonholed as mere traders, which is kind of like calling Da Vinci a doodler. Sure, they traded silver from Spain, papyrus from Egypt, and precious Tyrian purple dye, which was basically the Gucci of ancient textiles. But their real genius was in their ability to sail. They were the first to venture beyond the sight of land, navigating by stars and pioneering trade routes that would eventually become the Silk Road of the sea. Their naval prowess wasn't just about commerce. It was strategic. Imagine being a small city-state surrounded by powerful neighbors like Egypt and Assyria. Having a strong navy was like having the ultimate insurance policy. It allowed them to project power far beyond their modest borders and control key maritime choke points. In a world where sea routes were the highways of civilization, owning the Mediterranean was like owning the internet today. You might think all this seafaring would make them a tad insular, but no. These were the original cosmopolitans, building colonies as far afield as Carthage, which would later give Rome a serious run for its money. They were less about building empires through conquest and more about spreading their influence through cultural exchange. This was soft power before soft power was cool. And speaking of influence, let's not forget their writing system, which was a game changer. The Phoenician alphabet was a stripped-down, efficient way to communicate, perfect for people who were always on the move. It's the ancestor of nearly every alphabet used today. So, the next time you text a friend, thank the Phoenicians for making it possible. As the day in Tyre winds down, you can almost hear the clatter of hammers and the saws slicing through cedar as the shipbuilders work tirelessly. They know that every plank, every nail, every knot could mean the difference between a successful voyage and a watery grave. Yet despite the risks, the allure of the sea was irresistible. The horizon was not a boundary but a challenge, and the Phoenicians were nothing if not willing to rise to it. So there you have it, your morning in Tyre, where shipbuilding wasn't just an industry, it was a way of life. a testament to human ingenuity in a world that demanded both grit and grace. Tomorrow, who knows what the winds will bring, but one thing's for sure. The Phoenicians will be ready to sail wherever they need to go, powered by cedar and the unyielding spirit of adventure. As the sun dips below the horizon in Tyre, the shipbuilders are still at it, crafting the ancient equivalent of a Maserati from cedar. Welcome to the gritty side of Phoenician shipbuilding, where the scent of sawdust mingles with sweat and the sound of hammering echoes through the docks. We're diving deep into the construction of a bireme, the twin-road beauty that was part speedster, part cargo hauler, and all business. First things first, let's talk about the keel, the unsung hero of our maritime marvel. This backbone of the ship was no flimsy afterthought. It was the foundation, the sturdy spine upon which everything balanced. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper without a solid base. It's a non-starter. The keel was crafted from a single, massive cedar log. We're talking about lengths of up to 30 meters, meticulously shaped with hand tools that would make a modern carpenter weep. This wasn't just craftsmanship. It was artistry with a purpose. Now, the construction of a bireme wasn't a solo gig. It was a team sport. Picture a bustling crew of carpenters, sawyers, and laborers, each with their specialized skill set. These folks weren't dabbling in weekend DIY projects. They were the professionals of their day. It took around 30 to 50 workers to complete a single ship, and we're not talking about a weekend sprint. A bireme could take several months to construct, depending on size and complexity. Time was money, and in ancient Phoenicia, both were in short supply. Speaking of money, let's get to the nitty-gritty of costs. Building a bireme was no small investment. We're talking about a price tag that could easily hit several thousand silver shekels. To put that in perspective, a skilled laborer might earn about 1 shekel a month. So, to bankroll a bireme, you'd need the ancient equivalent of a venture capitalist. This wasn't just an economic transaction. It was a gamble on the high seas, a bet on the future of trade and power. The logistics of assembling a ship were a feat of organization. The timber had to be hauled from the mountains, a journey that was no stroll in the park. Imagine transporting logs that weighed as much as a small car over rugged terrain without the luxury of modern machinery. Once at the shipyard, the timber was shaped and assembled with a precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker nod in approval. Each plank was secured with wooden pegs and lashings made from plant fibers, ensuring that the bireme could withstand the ocean's tantrums. But let's not forget the economic ripple effect. The shipbuilding industry was a juggernaut that fueled other sectors. Blacksmiths crafted the nails and tools, weavers produced the sails, and rope makers twisted fiber into the lines that held everything together. Each ship launched wasn't just a testament to Phoenician ingenuity. It was a catalyst for the local economy. The folks in Tyre weren't just building ships, they were building livelihoods. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. The romantic notion of shipbuilding as a noble endeavor glosses over the harsh realities. Working conditions were brutal, with long hours under the relentless Mediterranean sun. Injuries were common and safety regulations. Forget about it. If you got hurt, you didn't get a compensation check. You got a pat on the back and a reminder that life was tough. Yet, despite the hardships, the allure of contributing to something greater, a vessel that could conquer the sea, was irresistible. And here's a sharp observation for you. The Phoenicians, in their relentless pursuit of maritime dominance, crafted a legacy that was as much about survival as it was about exploration. They understood that control of the seas was not just about trade. It was about projecting power and ensuring the prosperity of their city-states. As the night falls, the shipbuilders lay down their tools, leaving behind the skeletal outline of what will soon become a fully fledged bireme. This isn't just a pile of wood and nails. It's the promise of new horizons, the embodiment of Phoenician ambition. Tomorrow, the work continues, each hammer stroke echoing the heartbeat of a civilization that dared to dream beyond the edge of the map. Stay tuned, because we're just getting started. The birthing of a bireme is just one chapter in the epic tale of Phoenician shipbuilding, and there's so much more to explore. From the political maneuvers that kept the trade routes open to the innovations that set these ships apart, the story of the Phoenicians is a testament to human ingenuity in the face of daunting odds. So, as we leave the shipyard behind for now, remember this. The sea was the stage, but it was the shipbuilders of Tyre who wrote the script. As the shipyard echoes fade with the setting sun, let's pivot to the heart of Phoenician maritime genius, their engineering marvels. You see, the Phoenicians were like the Steve Wozniaks of the ancient world, quietly tinkering away, crafting ships that were not just wooden tubs, but floating wonders of innovation. Forget the Hollywood depictions of clunky, creaky vessels barely held together by spit and good intentions. These ships were the Formula One racers of their time, built with precision and flair. Take the Byrene, for example. This wasn't just a floating piece of wood. It was a calculated masterpiece. With 2 tiers of oarsmen, the Byrene was designed for speed and agility, able to zip through the Mediterranean like a hot knife through butter. Why 2 levels of rowers, you ask? More manpower meant more speed and power, crucial for both trade and warfare. It's like the ancient equivalent of adding nitrous to your street racer. These ships could outmaneuver anything on the water, and in a world where the sea was both highway and battlefield, that was a game changer. Now, let's talk about the tools and techniques that made all this possible. Forget the romantic idea of chisel-wielding artisans creating ships by sheer force of will. The Phoenicians were using advanced tools that would make even the most seasoned carpenter today raise an eyebrow. They had axes, adzes, saws, and drills, all crafted from bronze and iron, making them durable and precise. These weren't crude implements. They were the ancient world's version of laser-cutting technology. The shipwrights, those unsung heroes of the shipyard, were the real masterminds here. These folks were the engineers, architects, and project managers rolled into one. With years of training and a deep understanding of hydrodynamics, they knew how to shape a ship's hull to cut through water with minimal resistance. It was a delicate balance between weight and buoyancy, and they nailed it, literally. But let's not get too caught up in the romanticism. The reality was gritty. Shipwrights worked long hours under the blistering sun, and their work wasn't just physically demanding, it was mentally taxing. One miscalculation, one misplaced plank, and an entire ship could be doomed to a watery grave. It was high-stakes craftsmanship, where the reward was as great as the risk. Speaking of risk, let's bust the myth that these ships were unsinkable. Sure, they were marvels of engineering, but they weren't invincible. The Mediterranean was as unpredictable as a Game of Thrones plot twist. Storms, pirates, and the ever-present threat of war meant that every voyage was fraught with danger. Yet it was this very danger that made the Phoenicians masters of the sea. They didn't just build ships, they built resilience. And here's another sharp observation. The Phoenicians didn't just influence their own time. They left a legacy that echoed through the ages. The Greeks, the Romans, and even the Vikings borrowed from their shipbuilding techniques. The Phoenician ships were the blueprint for future naval advancements. Their designs were studied, adapted, and improved upon for centuries. It's like they were the original open-source code for shipbuilding. Now, let's pivot to the economic context. These ships weren't just about getting from point A to point B. They were the lifeblood of the Phoenician economy. Each ship launched meant new trade opportunities, new alliances, and new wealth flowing into their city-states. The Phoenicians understood that to control the seas was to control the economy. In a world where maritime trade was the backbone of prosperity, they were the undisputed champions. But here's the kicker. Despite their prowess, the Phoenicians never sought to build a sprawling empire. Their strength lay in their networks, in their ability to connect disparate cultures through trade and cultural exchange. They were the original globalists, long before the term was even coined. Their ships weren't just vessels of commerce, they were vessels of influence. As for the Hollywood-style depictions of these ships being crewed by muscle-bound heroes, let's set the record straight. The reality was far more diverse. A typical crew was a motley mix of seasoned sailors, eager apprentices, and sometimes even slaves. It was a microcosm of Phoenician society, where social status mattered less than skill and seaworthiness. It was a meritocracy of the ocean, where your ability to row, navigate, or patch a sail determined your place on board. So, as we wrap up our midday exploration of Phoenician shipbuilding, remember this. These weren't just ships. They were a testament to human ingenuity and a reflection of a civilization that dared to dream big. The Phoenicians didn't just navigate the seas. They charted a course for future generations. And as we prepare to delve deeper into their world, one thing is clear. The legacy of these ancient mariners is as vast and enduring as the sea itself. Stay tuned, because the voyage is far from over, and the winds of history are just beginning to stir. As the sun hits its afternoon stride, casting long shadows over the bustling shipyards of Tyre, Let's steer our focus to the undercurrents of politics and society that made Phoenician shipbuilding more than just a trade. It was a backbone of power. You see, these city-states, like Tyre and Sidon, were as much about savvy diplomacy as they were about cedar and sails. Their naval fleets weren't just there for flashy parades. They were the keys to their survival and influence, the ancient version of a nuclear deterrent. First, let me set the stage. Phoenicia was not a united kingdom, but a collection of fiercely independent city-states. Picture a family reunion where everyone's related, but no one can agree on anything. Each city had its own ruler, its own ambitions, and crucially, its own fleet. These fleets weren't just floating traders. They were the muscle behind political maneuvering, ensuring that whichever city you hailed from, you'd have a say in the Mediterranean Game of Thrones. It's like having a reserved parking spot at a crowded mall. Everyone wanted one, but only a few could afford it. Shipbuilding was an industry with political clout. A city-state with a formidable navy could flex its muscles to secure trade agreements, fend off pirates, and even project power onto distant shores. It's no exaggeration to say that the Phoenicians used their ships to carve out a maritime empire. Not by brute force, mind you, but through strategic alliances and well-placed colonies, like Carthage, which would later give Rome a run for its denarii. Now, about their colonies. These weren't just outposts, they were lifelines. Each one extended Phoenician influence across the Mediterranean, like a web spun from the finest Tyrian silk. These colonies were economic hubs, strategically placed to control trade routes and resources. They were the original globalization pioneers, setting the stage for a network that would rival any modern multinational corporation. Imagine Starbucks, but with amphorae of olive oil and wine instead of lattes. In warfare, these ships were game changers. The Bireme, with its double-stacked rowers, wasn't just fast, it was a tactical weapon. Its speed and maneuverability allowed for quick strikes and evasions, crucial in naval battles, where the stakes were as high as the waves were unpredictable. The Phoenicians weren't about head-on collisions. They were about precision strikes, using their superior naval tactics to outwit opponents. Think of them as the chess grandmasters of the high seas, always a step ahead, always calculating the next move. But let's not romanticize too much. This naval prowess came with societal ripples. The shipbuilding industry wasn't an equal opportunity employer. It was a microcosm of Phoenician society, with hierarchies as rigid as a cedar mast. At the top were the wealthy merchants and rulers who funded these ventures, the ancient venture capitalists. Below them, the skilled artisans and shipwrights, whose expertise kept the wheels, or rather the rudders, turning. Then there were the sailors, the unsung heroes of this maritime saga. Life on board wasn't exactly a luxury cruise. Forget the notion of adventure on the high seas. It was a hard-knock life. Sailors faced cramped quarters, meager rations, and the ever-present threat of storms and seasickness. They were the backbone of the Phoenician fleet, yet their lives were precarious, often dictated by the whims of nature and the demands of their city-states' ambitions. And here's a sharp observation for you. The Phoenician ship was a floating microcosm of their society, diverse, hierarchical, and driven by the promise of new horizons. Each voyage was a gamble, a high-stakes bet on the open sea, where fortunes could be won or lost with the shift of the wind. As we delve deeper, it's crucial to understand that these ships were more than just wooden vessels. They were symbols of Phoenician ingenuity and resilience. They played a pivotal role in the spread of their culture and influence, acting as the conduits of commerce and exchange. In a world where the sea was both barrier and bridge, the Phoenicians didn't just navigate, they excelled, turning the tides in their favor. So, as the afternoon light casts a golden hue over the shipyards, remember this. Phoenician shipbuilding was a masterclass in innovation and strategy, a testament to a civilization that understood the sea's dual nature as a path to prosperity and a formidable challenge. The legacy of their maritime endeavors is etched into the annals of history, a reminder of a time when cedar and sails ruled the waves and the world was just a horizon away. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and the winds of Phoenician ambition are still blowing strong. As the Mediterranean sunset bathes Tyre in a warm, amber glow, it's time to ponder the cultural legacy left behind by these maritime maestros. The Phoenicians weren't just sailors, they were cultural couriers, carrying the seeds of civilization across the seas. Their ships were the messengers, spreading not just goods and ideas, but also the very building blocks of communication, the alphabet. Let's set the record straight. While they didn't invent writing, the Phoenicians did something arguably more revolutionary. They simplified it. Their alphabet was a lean, mean, 22-character machine that ditched the cumbersome pictograms and hieroglyphs in favor of a streamlined phonetic system. Imagine upgrading from dial-up to fiber optics. That's the leap the Phoenician alphabet represented. This wasn't just an administrative convenience, it was a cultural catalyst. By the time the Greeks got their hands on it, the alphabet was like an ancient viral meme, spreading faster than gossip at a royal court. These nimble scripts weren't just etched onto papyrus scrolls. They were etched into the fabric of societies across the Mediterranean. The Phoenician alphabet was the Rosetta Stone before the Rosetta Stone, a linguistic bridge that connected cultures, facilitated trade, and ultimately laid the groundwork for the modern alphabets we use to text our friends today. So next time you're typing out a tweet or jotting down a grocery list, give a nod to the ancient scribes of Tyre and Sidon. Now, let's talk legends. The Phoenician sailors were the rock stars of their time, inspiring tales that would make even the most seasoned seafarer blush. From mythical voyages beyond the Pillars of Hercules to rumored encounters with sea monsters, their exploits were the stuff of epic poetry. But let's sprinkle some reality into this mythical stew. While it's tempting to romanticize these voyages as grand adventures, the truth was a bit more prosaic. Navigating by stars and primitive maps, these sailors faced the real threats of storms, pirates, and uncharted territories which, unlike the mythical krakens, could not be bested by sheer bravado alone. Yet, it's precisely this blend of myth and reality that gives the Phoenicians their enduring allure. Their ships were the stage, and the Mediterranean was the theater. They were the original thrill-seekers, exploring the unknown not out of blind courage, but calculated risk, a necessity when the sea was both your livelihood and your greatest adversary. Their innovations didn't just stop at shipbuilding. The Phoenicians were the maritime MacGyvers of their day, pioneering techniques that would set the standard for centuries. Their ships featured advanced designs like Morais and tenon joints, the ancient equivalent of using duct tape and WD-40 to solve any problem. These ships were the envy of the ancient world, coveted by everyone from Egyptian pharaohs to Greek tyrants. But let's not sugarcoat it. The life of a Phoenician sailor was no oceanic paradise. It was more deadliest catch than Mona. Cramped quarters, diets consisting of hardtack and fish, and the ever-present threat of disease were the daily fare. Forget about health insurance or retirement plans. For these sailors, the reward was the journey itself, though it often came with a side of scurvy. So, what's the takeaway from the Phoenician legacy? It's a tapestry woven from threads of innovation, courage, and a touch of madness. They didn't just sail the seas. They charted courses that would ripple through history, leaving a legacy as vast as the waters they navigated. Their story is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge and adventure often comes with risks, but those who dare to push beyond the horizon often find themselves in the pages of history. As the day in Tyre comes to a close, and the last rays of sunlight glint off the calm Mediterranean waters, we're left with an enduring vision, a civilization that thrived on the duality of fear and fascination with the sea. Their ships, once just silhouettes against the horizon, transformed into symbols of human ingenuity and the ceaseless quest for discovery. The Phoenicians remind us that while the sea can be a cruel mistress, it is also the canvas upon which the greatest stories are painted. Their legacy is not just in the artifacts they left behind, but in the very way we navigate the world today, both literally and metaphorically. So, as you drift to sleep with visions of cedar ships and distant shores, remember, the Phoenicians may have sailed into the sunset, but their influence sails on, charting a course through the currents of time itself. In the roller coaster ride of ancient Roman timekeeping, imagine waking up one day in 46 BCE, only to find out that the year has sprouted an extra 67 days. Yeah, that's right. The Romans, in their infinite wisdom, decided that 445 days made for a perfectly reasonable year. Welcome to the world of pre-Julian calendar chaos, where time was more a suggestion than a certainty, and Julius Caesar was about to press the ultimate snooze button on history. Before Caesar's reforms, the Roman calendar was like a toddler on a sugar high, unpredictable and prone to tantrums. The original model was a lunar calendar consisting of 355 days, with an extra month occasionally tossed in to keep the seasons from drifting too far off course. The problem: this extra month, known as Mercedonius, was added at the whim of the high priests, who, surprise, surprise, often had political motivations that made a mockery of celestial precision. If you think your modern calendar is a mess with its leap years and daylight savings, try keeping track of time when the guy in charge might decide to extend the year because his buddy needed more time in office. Now, why the Romans didn't just stick to the natural rhythm of the sun is a mystery wrapped in a toga. But they loved their lunacy, literally, leading to the seasons slipping like a poorly fitting sandal. By the time Caesar arrived on the scene, the calendar was a hot mess, and folks were celebrating the harvest in midwinter. Enter Caesar, whose military campaigns taught him a thing or two about logistics, like the fact that a reliable calendar is kind of important when you're trying to conquer Gaul, not to mention maintaining a functioning society. Caesar, never one to shy away from a monumental task, decided to synchronize Roman time with the solar year. The stakes were high, and so were the ambitions. If he could conquer time, perhaps he could conquer chaos itself. It helps when you have the backing of a little-known mathematician and astronomer from Alexandria named Sarsigenes. Together, they cooked up a plan to align the Roman calendar with the Egyptian solar year of 365 days. And just like that, Caesar was about to give the Romans the gift of a calendar that actually made sense, more or less. But don't go thinking this reform was just about making sure everyone knew when their taxes were due. Oh no, this was political theater at its finest. By aligning the calendar with the sun, Caesar essentially aligned himself with the divine. He was no longer just a military genius, but a master of time itself, a position that made him look a lot like a god, which was kind of the whole point. The new calendar would later be known as the Julian calendar, and its implementation would mark a pivotal shift in not just timekeeping, but in the very perception of power. And while we're on the subject of power, let's not forget the human element, our old friend, self-interest. The priests, who had been enjoying a bit too much leisure in their calendar manipulations, suddenly found themselves out of a cushy job. Imagine the chaos when Caesar told them, "Sorry guys, your calendar gigs are up. We've got a new system now." The political implications were as vast as the temporal ones. Caesar's reform wasn't just a practical measure. It was a statement that Rome would no longer be ruled by the whims of men, but by the regularity of the heavens. It was an audacious power play and a testament to Caesar's vision, or ego, depending on your perspective. With the introduction of this new calendar, the Romans could finally breathe a sigh of relief as their festivals, harvests, and fiscal deadlines began to make a bit more sense. But let's not romanticize it too much. The transition was as smooth as a chariot on cobblestones. People were confused, the priests were disgruntled, and there was more than a fair share of grumbling from the general populace who had to recalibrate their sundials, both figuratively and literally. Yet, despite the hiccups, the Julian calendar was a game-changer. It brought a semblance of order to the Roman world, and it endured for more than 600 years, until Pope Gregory Roman XIII decided it was time for yet another tweak. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's appreciate Caesar's daring attempt to tame the relentless march of days and the cosmic dance of the sun, if only to remind us of the folly and grandeur of human ambition, wrapped in the dusty pages of history. So, as you contemplate the next time you hit that snooze button, remember that the Romans did it first and ended up with a calendar that finally made sense, at least until the politicians got involved. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that time waits for no one, except maybe Julius Caesar. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves, shall we? Julius Caesar might have been the man who finally whipped the calendar into shape, but the average Roman citizen still had to deal with the daily grind of life in a world where time was a bit of a wild card. Imagine waking up each morning, trying to navigate a year that could stretch like taffy from 355 to 377 days, depending on which way the political winds were blowing. It was like trying to plan your week around the weather forecast. In an ancient version of Game of Thrones, winter might be coming, but good luck knowing exactly when. Now, the typical Roman wasn't lounging around in a toga all day like some well-dressed philosopher. Life was a relentless hustle, and the economy was the engine driving the entire empire. At the heart of it all was wheat, the not-so-glamorous grain that was the backbone of Roman sustenance. Picture a society where bread wasn't just a staple, it was practically a currency. The price of wheat was as closely watched as a gladiator match in the Colosseum, and fluctuations could send ripples through the social fabric faster than a chariot race. Let's talk numbers. By the late Republic, Rome was importing over 200,000 tons of grain annually. That's a lot of loaves, folks. The price of wheat was a barometer for everything from political stability to public mood. In 57 BCE, during a particularly severe shortage, the price soared to a staggering 12 times the normal rate. Imagine the chaos when bread suddenly cost as much as a senator's toga. Riots weren't uncommon when grain prices spiked, and no one wanted an angry mob on their doorstep. And speaking of angry mobs, let's dive into the delightful world of Roman tax collection. Unlike today's digital deductions, Roman taxes were more personal, and by personal, I mean someone showed up at your door demanding payment. Picture this. You're a Roman farmer, minding your own business, when along comes a tax collector with all the charm of a hungry lion. These tax collectors, known as publicani, were essentially private contractors with the state's blessing to collect taxes. Their methods, let's just say they weren't winning any customer service awards. They operated on a system that would make even the most hardened IRS agent blush, taking a cut of what they collected. This incentivized them to, shall we say, be a bit enthusiastic in their duties. Here's the kicker. Taxes weren't just about funding Rome's endless wars or Caesar's next big project. They were also a powerful political tool. A savvy politician could curry favor by reducing taxes or, conversely, squeeze opponents by jacking them up. It was a system rife with manipulation, and the average citizen was often caught in the crossfire. Now, while we're on the topic of manipulation, let's not forget how the calendar chaos played right into the hands of the politically astute. Those extra months, when invoked, could be a boon or bane, depending on who you were. Imagine a consul extending his term just because the calendar said so, or an ally needing a bit more time to muster support for a crucial vote. The calendar wasn't just about marking time. It was a chessboard where political games were played in earnest. Amidst this temporal and economic turbulence, the daily life of a Roman was a constant balancing act. Markets were bustling hubs of activity where everything from garum, that pungent Roman fish sauce, to fine silks was traded. The forum wasn't just a place to shop. It was the social media of the ancient world, a place to see and be seen, hear the latest gossip, and maybe, just maybe, catch wind of a tax break or a grain shipment on the horizon. Yet, despite the chaos, the allure of Rome was undeniable. It was a city of contradictions and contrasts, where the grandeur of the Colosseum sat cheek by jowl with the squalor of the Subura. The Eternal City was a magnet, pulling people from all over the empire to its bustling streets, promising opportunity amidst the uncertainty. For every senator's villa on the Palatine Hill, there was a tenement crowded with families trying to make ends meet. It was a world where fortunes could rise and fall as quickly as the sun set behind the 7 hills. And what of the myth of Rome as the Eternal City, the epitome of order and civilization? Well, that's the beauty of history, isn't it? The allure of the empire, the grandeur of its structures, and the legacy of its culture are intertwined with the gritty reality of its day-to-day struggles. For every marble statue and heroic tale, there were real people living real lives, navigating the unpredictable winds of fate in a city that was as demanding as it was magnificent. So, as we leave our Roman friends to their bustling marketplaces and unpredictable calendars, it's worth remembering that history isn't just about the grand narratives or the famous leaders. It's about the everyday lives, the small moments, and the human stories that give life to the dusty pages of time. Stay tuned, because the journey through the twists and turns of ancient Rome has only just begun. Now, let's wander away from the cobbled streets of Rome and drift along the sandy banks of the Nile, where the ancient Egyptians were busy perfecting the art of timekeeping. Unlike the Romans, who treated time like an unruly child, the Egyptians approached it with the precision of a seasoned clockmaker. And why not? When your entire civilization depends on the whims of a river, you better get your timing right. Here's a fun fact. The ancient Egyptians were so obsessed with time that they practically invented the concept of the leap year. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand why the Egyptians had such a love affair with the stars. The Nile River, the mighty artery of Egypt, dictated every aspect of life, from agriculture to taxation. Each year, like clockwork, the river would flood its banks, depositing rich silt and making the land as fertile as a gossip column in ancient Alexandria. The trick was predicting when this life-giving inundation would occur. Enter the Egyptian astronomers, the rock stars of the ancient world. These early stargazers weren't just idly counting constellations. They were the scientists of their time, deciphering the celestial language. They noticed that the annual flooding of the Nile coincided with the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. Talk about a cosmic alarm clock. With their eyes to the heavens, the Egyptians crafted a calendar that reflected their agricultural needs. A solar calendar with 365 days. No, it wasn't perfect, and yes, it had a slight drift, but for the time it was pretty darn impressive. Their year was divided into 3 seasons of 4 months each. Akhet, flooding, Peret, growing, and Shemu, harvesting. Each month had 30 days, with 5 extra days tacked on at the end of the year for good measure. Talk about a built-in party week. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite their meticulous observations, the Egyptians realized that their calendar was slipping behind the actual solar year. Enter the leap year concept. Every 4 years, they added an extra day to keep things aligned with the sun. It was like hitting the refresh button on your cosmic calendar, ensuring that the Nile's behavior matched up with the heavenly predictions. Now, why does this matter? Well, the Egyptians weren't just keeping a neat diary. This calendar was crucial for managing their economy. The timing of the flood dictated when fields could be sown, when taxes could be collected, and when Pharaoh could demand his share of the grain. In a society where agriculture was king, getting the calendar right was the difference between a full granary and a famine. And let's not forget the political implications. The pharaohs wielded their calendars like divine mandates. By aligning themselves with the celestial order, they claimed a sort of godly authority. When the calendar was in sync with the heavens, it was as if the gods themselves had endorsed the ruling dynasty. For the Egyptians, time wasn't just a measure. It was a symbol of cosmic order and divine favor. Yet, despite their best efforts, the Egyptians couldn't entirely escape the occasional calendar chaos. Over centuries, the small discrepancies added up. By the time Cleopatra was charming Roman generals, the Egyptian calendar was out of whack by about a month. But let's be real. When you're dealing with love triangles and political intrigue, a little temporal drift is the least of your concerns. So, there you have it. While the Egyptians are often remembered for their pyramids and mummies, their contribution to timekeeping was just as monumental. They were the original Time Lords, blending astronomy with agriculture, politics with prophecy. And in a world where the Nile was the lifeblood of an entire civilization, mastering time was nothing short of a survival strategy. As we leave the banks of the Nile, it's worth pondering how this ancient obsession with time continues to shape our world. The Egyptians laid the groundwork for centuries of astronomical exploration, proving that sometimes the most profound insights come from simply looking up. So, the next time you glance at your watch or check your calendar app, take a moment to thank those ancient stargazers who first dared to capture time by the tail and succeeded in leaving their mark on history. But hold tight, because our journey through the annals of time is far from over. We've only just begun to unravel the intricate tapestry of ancient civilizations and their quest to tame the relentless march of days. Stay tuned as we continue to explore how these early pioneers set the stage for the world we live in today, one starry night at a time. Ah, the Egyptians, those original timekeepers who thought they had the universe all figured out, only to get blindsided by their own calendar quirks. But just as the Egyptians were wrestling their calendar back into shape, along came Alexander the Great, marching in like he owned the place. Because, well, he kind of did. You see, when Alexander and his Macedonian entourage rolled into Egypt in 332 BCE, they weren't just bringing military might. They were also toting a whole different vision of timekeeping. The Greeks, with their love of philosophy and a penchant for asking the big questions, like what even is time, found themselves in a bit of a cosmic tug-of-war with the Egyptians. The Greek method of timekeeping, heavily influenced by the lunar cycles, was about as different from the Egyptian solar calendar as a toga is from a pharaoh's headdress. The Greeks, ever the thinkers, viewed time as something that should be pondered, debated, and preferably written about in long-winded treatises. But Alexander wasn't interested in endless debates. He was more of a let's conquer the known world before lunch kind of guy. So, while he was busy founding cities like Alexandria, which would become a hub of knowledge and culture, his administrators were left to sort out the calendar mess left in his wake. The result, a delightful fusion, or perhaps confusion, of Greek and Egyptian timekeeping practices. Enter the Ptolemies, the dynasty that ruled Egypt after Alexander's empire fragmented faster than a sandcastle at high tide. The Ptolemies, keen on maintaining their Greek heritage while ruling over an Egyptian populace, found themselves in a tricky position. They needed a calendar that could appease both the Greek settlers and the native Egyptians. So they did what any pragmatic ruler would do. They created a hybrid calendar system that was a bit like a cosmic smoothie, blending solar and lunar elements with a dash of political savvy. Under Ptolemy Roman III, they introduced the canopic reform in 238 BCE, which aimed to align the Egyptian calendar more closely with the solar year. This was their attempt to stop the slow drift that had been throwing off agriculture and, more importantly, tax collection. The Ptolemies decreed that an extra day be added every 4 years, essentially inventing the leap year long before Julius Caesar made it famous. But here's the kicker. The reform was never fully implemented. Why? Because changing a calendar is like trying to change a light bulb in a room full of philosophers. Everyone has an opinion, and no one wants to actually do it. The Egyptians, attached to their traditional ways, were resistant to change. Meanwhile, the Greeks, who loved nothing more than good philosophical debate, found the whole thing utterly baffling. Imagine Aristotle trying to wrap his head around a calendar that was neither fish nor fowl, neither Greek nor Egyptian. It was a cosmic puzzle that even the greatest minds of the age couldn't quite piece together. But let's not overlook the economic implications of this calendar conundrum. For the Ptolemies, getting the timing right was crucial for maintaining their grip on power. The Nile's flooding dictated the agricultural calendar, and by extension, the wealth of the kingdom. Taxes were collected based on the harvest, and any miscalculation could lead to shortages, unrest, or worse, an empty royal treasury. And speaking of treasuries, let's talk about the Ptolemies' knack for blending Greek and Egyptian traditions in the realm of finance. They introduced coinage in Egypt, a practice that was quintessentially Greek, but adapted to fit the local economy. While earlier Egyptians had relied on barter and a somewhat nebulous system of value, the Greeks brought their love of shiny metal discs stamped with the ruler's face. This was more than just a monetary reform. It was a statement of power. Coins were portable propaganda, reinforcing the Ptolemies' rule with every transaction. The Ptolemaic economy thrived on trade, thanks in part to their strategic location at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. Alexandria became a bustling port city, its markets humming with the chatter of merchants hawking everything from grain to papyrus. It was a city where cultures collided, and nowhere was this more evident than in the calendar. The Ptolemies' attempt to merge Greek and Egyptian timekeeping wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was a practical necessity for a multicultural society. It demonstrated that even in the ancient world, the challenge of uniting diverse peoples under a single system could be as daunting as any military conquest. The calendar, as it turned out, was a microcosm of the political and cultural balancing act that defined Ptolemaic Egypt. So, as we gaze back at this ancient tapestry of time and power, it's tempting to romanticize the Ptolemies as enlightened rulers who deftly blended the best of both worlds. But let's not kid ourselves. The reality was far messier. Their calendar reforms were as much about consolidating control as they were about philosophical harmony. And while the Greeks and Egyptians might have disagreed over the finer points of timekeeping, they could at least agree on one thing. The Ptolemies knew how to throw one heck of a banquet, whatever the date. In the end, the Ptolemaic experiment in calendar reform was a testament to the complexities of cultural integration. It was a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of daily life, like keeping track of time, can become entangled in the grand sweep of history. As we prepare to delve deeper into the annals of antiquity, let's keep in mind that the story of time is far from over. The Greeks and Egyptians may have set the stage, but the real drama is just beginning. Stay tuned for more cosmic capers and historical hijinks as we continue our journey through the ages. Fast forward to the dawn of the Julian calendar, and you start to see the faint glimmers of modern time management coming into focus. Julius Caesar's sweeping reforms in 45 BCE weren't just a lesson in celestial precision. They were a masterclass in political theater. The Julian calendar, with its 365-day year and a leap year tacked on every 4 years, was a game changer. It was like upgrading from a horse-drawn cart to a sleek Roman chariot, capable of slicing through the chaotic landscape of time with the efficiency of a Roman legion. But don't let the grandiosity fool you. Despite its innovative design, the Julian calendar was not without its quirks. For starters, the solar year is actually about 365, 2,425 days long. Who would have thought? This means that even with Caesar's best efforts, the calendar was still drifting ever so slightly, like a ship with a slow leak. Over centuries, this drift amounted to about 11 minutes per year, which might not sound like much, but give it 600 years, and suddenly you're celebrating Christmas in spring. Talk about a calendar with commitment issues. Yet in the grand scheme of things, the Julian calendar was a monumental improvement over its predecessors. It brought a sense of order and predictability to a world that desperately needed both. Imagine trying to organize an empire that spanned continents without a reliable calendar. It would be like trying to conduct an orchestra with each section playing from a different sheet of music. By aligning with the solar year, Caesar gave Rome, and eventually much of Europe, a unified framework for timekeeping that was both practical and symbolic. The political implications were as vast as the temporal ones. By managing to pin down time itself, Caesar effectively positioned himself as a godlike figure. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a master of the cosmos, a man who could bend the heavens to his will. It was a bold statement, and one that has resonated through the ages. But let's not get too carried away. The calendar may have been revolutionary, but it was still subject to the whims of politics. Leap years were occasionally skipped, or added at the discretion of whoever held power, proving that even the most celestial of systems could be dragged down by earthly concerns. Now, despite its flaws, the Julian calendar's legacy is undeniable. It set the stage for the eventual adoption of the Gregorian calendar in 1582, a change that was as much about religious authority as it was about timekeeping precision. Pope Gregory Roman XXX, not to be outdone by a Roman emperor, decided it was time for another round of celestial tinkering. His calendar reform was designed to correct the drift that had accumulated over the centuries, effectively realigning the calendar with the equinoxes and solstices. The Gregorian calendar, with its nuanced leap year rules, skipped leap years on century marks unless divisible by 400, was a triumph of mathematical finesse, but implementing was no walk in the park. Different regions adopted it at different times, leading to a period of delightful temporal chaos. Some countries, like Britain, held out until 1752, while others jumped on board right away. Imagine trying to coordinate international trade or diplomacy when your neighbor's calendar is 10 days ahead of yours. It was like a cosmic version of who's on first. This was more than just a correction. It was a statement of power. By aligning the calendar with the Vatican's sense of divine order, Gregory Roman XIII reaffirmed the Church's authority over not just spiritual matters, but temporal ones as well. It was a bold move, one that underscored the enduring human desire to impose order on chaos, to carve out a sense of control in an unpredictable world. And isn't that the crux of our obsession with time? From ancient Rome to the modern day, we've been trying to wrangle it, to make it work for us rather than against us. The Julian and Gregorian calendars are more than just systems of organization. They are reflections of our deepest aspirations and anxieties. They are symbols of our unending quest to understand and command the universe, to impose our will upon the stars. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour of ancient timekeeping, let's take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these early attempts to master time. They remind us that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition and folly. From the Romans who thought they could conquer time with the stroke of a quill, to the Egyptians who looked to the stars for guidance, Every calendar is a testament to our enduring desire to make sense of the world around us. And as you check your watch or glance at your phone's calendar today, consider the centuries of trial and error that went into that simple act. Remember that behind every date and every appointment is a story, one that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that time waits for no one, except maybe Julius Caesar and Pope Gregory Roman XIII, who each had their moment in the sun, bending time to their will, if only for a moment. If you think your job is tough, try swapping your desk chair for a pile of sand and your laptop for a hoe. Welcome to the daily grind of ancient civilizations, where the concept of wealth didn't involve stocks or Bitcoin, but was all about barley and cattle. That's right, in the bustling heart of Mesopotamia and the sun-baked fields of Egypt, the real titans of the economy were the farmers and herders. Forget about Wall Street suits. These folks were the original traders, navigating a complex economy with nothing more than sweat, calloused hands, and a good sense of timing. Let's start with Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, often credited as the cradle of civilization. And boy, were they cradling some serious agriculture. With around 75% of the population stuck in fields, either growing grain or raising livestock, this was no leisurely stroll through the park. Instead, it was a grueling sunrise-to-sunset gig, where wealth was measured in bushels and herds. The primary crops included barley, wheat, and flax, the ancient equivalents of today's tech stocks, given their value. Barley was especially crucial, forming the backbone of the Mesopotamian economy, serving as currency, and even transforming into everyone's favorite ancient brew, beer. Now, before we start romanticizing this as some idyllic pastoral life, let's throw in a reality check. The average farmer worked his fields with basic wooden plows, often pulled by oxen, under the relentless sun. In terms of productivity, a decent year might yield around 200-250 kg of barley per hectare. Compare that to modern yields of over 8,000 kg per hectare, and suddenly those desk job woes don't seem so bad, do they? And if Mother Nature decided to throw a tantrum with a flood or drought, well, say goodbye to your savings and hello to the local granary loan shark. Over in Egypt, things weren't much different, but they did have the advantage of the Nile. Every year, the river would flood its banks, depositing nutrient-rich silt onto the fields. This annual miracle was like receiving a bonus check, boosting crop yields and ensuring the survival of the civilization. A farmer's year revolved around this cycle. From the inundation to the harvest, every action was dictated by the Nile's moods. Despite the predictable flooding, farming was still no picnic. With a simple sickle and some back-breaking labor, ancient Egyptians managed to harvest enough grain to feed an empire, all while keeping a wary eye out for crocodiles and hippos that might decide to crash the party. So, what about the cattle? In both Mesopotamia and Egypt, livestock wasn't just about milk and meat. Cattle were a movable feast of wealth. They were used as dowries, paid as taxes, and sacrificed to appease the gods. Imagine paying your IRS bill with a cow. Talk about a different tax code. A man's wealth was often judged by the size of his herd, and losing livestock to disease or raids was akin to watching your stock portfolio tank overnight. But let's not ignore the power dynamics at play. Behind every thriving field and contented cow was a bureaucracy ready to collect its cut. In Mesopotamia, the temple and palace were the dual centers of power, each claiming a share of the agricultural output. Temples acted as both religious and economic institutions, owning vast tracts of land worked by dependent farmers who paid their dues in produce instead of cash. Meanwhile, the palace had its own estates, and the king was often the biggest landowner around, which meant he was the Jeff Bezos of barley. Egypt's pharaohs wielded similar control, their divine status ensuring compliance. Taxes were collected in grain, and scribes kept meticulous records on clay tablets. This wasn't just about feeding the population, it was about maintaining power. Pharaohs like Ramses II weren't just building impressive monuments, they were also orchestrating a vast economic machine that required a steady flow of resources to keep it running smoothly. Now, here's where things get spicy, literally and figuratively. Trade was the lifeline that connected these ancient economies to the wider world. Mesopotamians traded with regions as far afield as the Indus Valley and Anatolia, exchanging their surplus grain for luxury goods like lapis lazuli, tin, and textiles. Meanwhile, Egyptians were busy importing cedar wood from Lebanon and gold from Nubia, all to satisfy the insatiable appetites of their elite. But trade wasn't just about shiny objects. It was about survival. A bad harvest could be mitigated by importing grain from neighboring regions, highlighting the interdependence of these ancient communities. It's like the ancient version of a bailout, but instead of a government stepping in, it was more like a friendly neighbor with a few extra bushels of wheat. Speaking of survival, the social structures of these civilizations were as rigid as the clay tablets their scribes used. Class divisions were stark, with a clear hierarchy from the ruling elites down to the lowly farmers and slaves. Yet, despite the disparities, the entire system was surprisingly stable, so long as everyone knew their place. The promise of divine favor or fear of divine wrath kept people in line, with temples and priests playing pivotal roles in maintaining order. It's a bit like the ultimate company town, where the boss isn't just your employer, but also your spiritual guide and tax collector. Now, let's debunk a romantic myth or two. The idea of the noble savage or idyllic peasant is just that, a myth. Life was harsh, and mortality rates were high. Average life expectancy hovered around 30-35 years, and childhood was especially perilous. Diseases, malnutrition, and the occasional marauding band took their toll. Yet, within this struggle, these ancient people laid the foundations of civilization. They developed writing, codified laws, and built architectural wonders that still capture our imagination today. But before we get too carried away with admiration, remember that these achievements came at a cost. Slavery was an accepted part of life, and the labor force that built those stunning ziggurats and pyramids often did so under duress. It's a sobering reminder that the glories of the past were often built on the backs of those who didn't have much choice in the matter. So, the next time you're feeling overwhelmed by your workload, consider the ancient farmer plowing his fields under the hot sun, or the scribe painstakingly etching records onto clay tablets. They faced a world where success was never guaranteed, and survival depended on a delicate balance of nature, hard work, and sheer luck. And while their lives may seem worlds apart from ours, the echoes of their struggles and triumphs continue to shape the world we know today. Now, as we shift gears from the grain fields to the gilded halls of power, let's dive into the ancient political scene, where ambition was as common as sand in the desert, and betrayal was practically a job requirement. Think of it as the original reality show, minus the camera crews, but with plenty of backstabbing and intrigue. First up, the Byzantine Empire, an entity so bureaucratically complex it makes modern red tape look like child's play. The Byzantines were masters of administration, with an elaborate system that would make your head spin faster than a carousel. Picture an empire where the emperor sat at the top, but the real power often lay with slick-talking courtiers and eunuchs skilled in the art of manipulation. These guys could teach Machiavelli a thing or two. The Byzantine court was a hotbed of intrigue, where alliances were as fragile as ancient pottery. The Byzantine bureaucracy wasn't just about pushing papyrus. This was a finely tuned machine, powered by countless scribes, tax collectors, and officials. They kept the empire running while simultaneously feathering their own nests. The civil service was the empire's backbone, and the civil servants knew it. They were the original middle managers, juggling responsibilities and skimming off the top whenever possible. The Byzantine tax system was a marvel of complexity, with taxes on everything from land and salt to the air you breathed. Okay, maybe not the air, but it was close. This was an empire that ran on taxes and tariffs, and woe betide anyone who tried to dodge their dues. Meanwhile, over in Rome, politics was a blood sport where careers rose and fell with the whims of the populace and the Senate's shifting alliances. Roman senators, those paragons of virtue and civic duty, or so they'd have you believe, often had side hustles that would raise eyebrows faster than a gladiator match. Land speculation, lucrative contracts, and even dabbling in trade were all fair game, despite the official disdain for commerce. It seems the ancient Romans were well aware of the benefits of diversifying their portfolios. Take Marcus Licinius Crassus, for example. Known as the wealthiest man in Rome, Crassus amassed his fortune through a combination of shrewd real estate investments, a private fire brigade that conveniently offered help only after the owners agreed to sell their burning properties, and backing military ventures that brought in plunder by the cartload. His wealth wasn't just about living the high life. It was a political tool, a way to curry favor, buy influence, and keep rivals at bay. It's a reminder that sometimes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But let's not forget Egypt, where the political scene was as steeped in tradition as it was in ambition. The pharaohs ruled with divine authority, but behind the scenes, the court was rife with intrigue. The Egyptian elite had a curious obsession with immortality, and they weren't just building tombs, they were crafting legacies. The construction of monumental pyramids wasn't just about showing off. It was about ensuring a smooth transition to the afterlife, with all the pomp and circumstance their earthly lives deserved. The pharaoh's court was a place where officials vied for favor, and priests wielded spiritual and political power. They controlled vast temple estates, accumulating wealth and influence that sometimes rivaled the pharaoh himself. The priests of Ammon at Thebes were particularly powerful, often acting as kingmakers. It's a bit like a modern megachurch, but with more hieroglyphs and fewer televangelists. Now, while we're on the topic of juicy gossip, let's not overlook the scandalous tales that made ancient courts the talk of the town, or at least the talk of whoever could read the latest scribble gossip. Cleopatra, for instance, was a master of using her charm and intelligence to sway powerful Roman figures, from Julius Caesar to Mark Antony. Her relationships were strategic as much as they were romantic, showcasing a keen sense of political acumen and a flair for the dramatic. Or consider Empress Theodora of Byzantium, a former actress who rose to become one of the most influential women of her time. She was the power behind Emperor Justinian, known for her sharp wit and even sharper political instincts. Theodora's life was a rags-to-riches tale that would make Cinderella's story look like a casual weekend makeover. These tales of power, intrigue, and ambition remind us that the corridors of power were never as straightforward as they appeared. Behind every grand procession and public speech was a web of alliances, betrayals, and power plays that would make even the most seasoned reality TV producer blush. So, while we may dream of the grandeur and glory of ancient empires, let's not forget that inside those palatial walls, the game of politics was as cutthroat as any modern election, complete with its own set of rules, and players willing to do whatever it took to come out on top. The stakes were as high as the pyramids, and the only certainty was that nothing was ever certain. As we prepare to delve deeper into this world of ancient politics, where the stakes were life and death, remember, history isn't just a collection of dates and names. It's a story of ambition, power, and the timeless human desire to leave a mark on the world, no matter the cost. As we leave behind the power plays and palace intrigues, let's take a detour into the heart of the beast, the ancient cities of Rome and Athens. Picture bustling streets where the past and future collided in a cacophony of voices, smells, and sights that would make Times Square look like a Zen retreat. Both cities were marvels of their time, but beneath the marble facades and grand forums was a daily grind that'd make even the most dedicated urbanite cringe. Rome, the eternal city, was the epitome of imperial grandeur. With a population peaking at over 1 million people in the 1st century AD, it was the New York City of its day, minus the skyscrapers, but with significantly more togas. Rome's streets were a chaotic blend of vendors hawking everything from olive oil to exotic pets, and philosophers debating the meaning of life in the nearest bathhouse. The Roman Forum was the nerve center, a place where politics and commerce intermingled in a chaotic dance that would make Machiavelli proud. Yet, for all its glory, Rome wasn't exactly the epitome of cleanliness. Imagine narrow streets clogged with foot traffic, carts, and livestock, all sharing space with the occasional chariot race. Public sanitation was, to put it kindly, a work in progress. The Romans did have an impressive sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima, or Great Drain, built around 600 BC. It was an engineering marvel, but even this couldn't keep up with the waste produced by 1 million people. Let's just say that crossing the street required an agility that had given Olympic gymnasts a run for their money. On the flip side, Athens, the cradle of democracy and birthplace of philosophy, was busy setting the stage for Western civilization. Athenian society was centered around the agora, the bustling marketplace where Socrates might have casually strolled, questioning passers-by about virtue and justice while avoiding the less philosophical endeavors of pickpockets. The city housed around 250,000 residents at its peak, with a vibrant mix of free citizens, slaves, and foreigners, all contributing to its cultural melting pot. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Athens wasn't just Socratic dialogues and marble statues. The city was a living organism, teeming with life, and unfortunately, not the most hygienic living conditions. Water was drawn from wells and public fountains, while waste was often dumped in the streets. Sound familiar? It's the ancient version of leaving your trash out and hoping the garbage ferry takes it away. Spoiler alert, it didn't always work. Despite these gritty realities, both cities boasted architectural wonders that have stood the test of time. Rome had the Colosseum, an arena for gladiator games that could seat up to 50,000 spectators, all eagerly awaiting the next bout. And let's not forget the Pantheon, a temple to all the gods, with its iconic dome that still boggles the minds of architects today. These structures weren't just about aesthetics. They were statements of power and technological prowess. They whispered, or rather, shouted, Rome's dominance to anyone who dared to listen. Athens, meanwhile, had the Acropolis, a testament to its artistic and intellectual legacy. The Parthenon, dedicated to Athena, stood as a symbol of Athenian democracy and culture. The city's architecture reflected its values, balance, order, and a deep respect for human potential. Yet, beneath these gleaming facades lay the stark realities of class division and political strife. Not everyone got to debate philosophy or enjoy the arts. Many were too busy eking out a living or, for the unfortunate, serving as property of others. Now, don't get me wrong, these cities weren't all grit and grime. They offered the ancient equivalent of entertainment and leisure. Rome had its public baths, a social hub where citizens could relax, gossip, and yes, even conduct business. For a small fee, you could enjoy the Coldarium hot bath, Tepidarium warm bath, and Frigidarium cold bath, all while catching up on the latest political scandal or poetic masterpiece. In Athens, the theatre was the goda for a night out. The city was the birthplace of drama, and it took its entertainment seriously. The theatre of Dionysus could seat up to 17,000 spectators, all eager to watch the latest tragedy or comedy. Playwrights like Sophocles and Aristophanes didn't just entertain. They provoked thought and debate, weaving stories that resonated with the political and social issues of their time. But let's not sugarcoat it. Life in these cities was as much about survival as it was about culture. The urban poor lived in insulae or apartment blocks that were prone to fires and collapses. Rent was high, and living conditions were cramped. Think New York studio apartment, but with less structural integrity and more rats. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was as wide as the Tiber, a reminder that even in the heart of civilization, inequality was alive and well. Yet despite these challenges, the cities thrived, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. They were places where ideas were born, where the past and future were constantly in conversation. The streets of Rome and Athens were a living tapestry, each thread representing a life, a story, a moment in time that contributed to the rich tapestry of history. So, the next time you find yourself stuck in traffic or dodging a questionable puddle on the sidewalk, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these ancient metropolises. They remind us that while the details may change, the essence of urban life, with all its splendor and squalor, remains surprisingly consistent. And as we continue our journey through history, let's keep our eyes open to the grit behind the grandeur, the dirt that often underlies the dazzling. Just when you think you've got a handle on the ancient world, farming, politics, urban chaos, along comes a legend to throw a wrench into your timeline. Let's start with one of history's most enchanting enigmas, Cleopatra, the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. You've heard the tales. Cleopatra, the siren of the Nile, whose beauty brought Roman titans to their knees. But here's the twist. Cleopatra wasn't exactly winning beauty contests by modern standards. She wasn't Helen of Troy with the face that launched 1,000 ships. She was more like the face that launched 1,000 debates. Let's get down to brass tacks. Cleopatra Roman VII was born in 69 BC into a family that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. By the time she was 21, She was sharing the throne with her brother Ptolemy Roman XIII as co-regent. Now, the Ptolemies were famous for keeping it all in the family. Literally, we're talking sibling marriages that would make a soap opera blush. But this wasn't about romance. It was a strategic move to keep the bloodline pure and the power centralized. When Cleopatra rolled into power, Egypt was a shadow of its former glory. The golden days of the pharaohs were long gone, and the kingdom was teetering on the brink of Roman annexation. This was no time for Cleopatra to be merely a pretty face. She needed to be a master strategist, which, spoiler alert, she was. Cleopatra spoke multiple languages, including Egyptian, which was a rarity among her Macedonian Greek dynasty. She was savvy, politically astute, and knew how to make an entrance, often dramatically arriving in a roll of carpet, unfurling at the feet of Julius Caesar. Talk about making a splash. But why does the myth of Cleopatra's beauty persist? It's simple. People love a good story. Throughout history, there's been a tendency to attribute a woman's success to her looks rather than her brains. The ancient Roman historian Cassius Dio described her as a woman of surpassing beauty, while Plutarch, writing a century later, noted that her charm pervaded every part of her being. It's like an ancient version of Instagram filters. Reality gets a makeover to fit a narrative. The truth is, it was Cleopatra's charisma, intellect, and political cunning that gave her the edge in a world dominated by men. She played the Game of Thrones better than most, forming alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony, not just through romantic entanglements, but through shared political objectives. Now, onto another ancient myth that needs a good debunking: the Greeks as the uber-intellectuals of antiquity. Sure, they gave us Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, no small feat, but let's not forget that the Greeks were also a society that subscribed to some pretty bizarre ideas. Take Aristotle, for instance, who believed that women were essentially deformed men. Not exactly a paragon of progressive thought, right? The myth of the intellectual Greeks is partly due to their prolific writings, which survived and were disseminated throughout the ages. But the reality is, for every philosopher pondering the nature of existence, there were hundreds of Athenians who were more concerned with the latest chariot race or the price of olive oil. Athens had over 250,000 residents, but only a small fraction were citizens with the leisure to engage in philosophical debate. The rest were busy hustling to make ends meet, or worse, toiling as slaves in the silver mines of Laurion. Yet, the idea persists that ancient Greece was a utopia of free thought and democracy. In truth, only about 30,000 Athenians were considered full citizens with the right to vote, of a population that included women, slaves, and medics, foreigners, who had no political rights. Democracy, yes, but only if you were part of the exclusive club. It's a bit like celebrating a party you weren't invited to. So why do these legends endure? Humans have an innate love for stories, especially those that elevate and simplify the complexities of history. Cleopatra as a femme fatale, and the Greeks as the intellectual giants of the ancient world, make for compelling narratives that have been retold, refined, and romanticized over millennia. They reflect our penchant for heroes and heroines who embody ideals we aspire to or, perhaps, are wary of. In the end, the ancient world was as much about spin as it was about stone. Cleopatra, with her keen sense of public relations, and the Greeks, with their philosophical branding, were the original PR geniuses, crafting images that have persisted long after their empires crumbled. They understood the power of a good story, a legacy that resonates in our modern age, where perception often trumps reality. So, as we continue to navigate the sands of time, let's remember that history is more than a series of facts. It's a tapestry woven with myths, half-truths, and the occasional outright fabrication. And in that tapestry lies the essence of what it means to be human, to dream, to aspire, and yes, to sometimes embellish the truth. So, as we continue to navigate the sands of time, let's remember that history is more than a series of facts. It's a tapestry woven with myths, half-truths, and the occasional outright fabrication. But why do these ancient tales still matter today? Why do we, modern dwellers in a digital age, care about pyramids, philosophers, and emperors long gone? For starters, let's tackle those pyramids. These colossal structures are more than just impressive heaps of limestone. They are the original skyscrapers, minus the elevators and coffee shops. Built between 2550 to 2490 BC, the pyramids of Giza were monumental feats of engineering and labor. Khufu's Great Pyramid alone required around 3 million blocks, each weighing in at about 5 tons. Imagine the logistical gymnastics involved in quarrying, transporting, and assembling these stones with nothing but manpower and rudimentary tools. And yet, here they stand, defying time and gravity, a testament to human ambition and sheer determination. But beyond the architectural wow factor, the pyramids were a declaration of divine authority. They were the ultimate PR stunt, designed to cement the pharaoh's status as a god king in both life and the afterlife. The pyramids remind us that while technology has advanced, the human desire to leave a legacy, etched in stone or digital code, remains unchanged. Our modern skyscrapers and monuments, from the Burj Khalifa to the Statue of Liberty, echo this ancient longing for permanence and glory. Now, let's shift gears to the philosophers, those ancient thinkers who dared to question the world around them. The Greeks, with their love for symposiums and intellectual debate, laid the groundwork for Western thought. Their inquiries into ethics, politics, and metaphysics still resonate in our classrooms and boardrooms. Socrates, who lived from 469 to 399 BC, famously claimed that the unexamined life is not worth living, a sentiment that continues to inspire introspection and critical thinking. But don't be fooled into thinking it was all highbrow musings over wine and cheese. Philosophy in ancient Greece was a contact sport, with ideas clashing as fiercely as any gladiator bout. The Socratic method, that relentless questioning technique, was less about gentle inquiry and more about intellectual sparring. It's a reminder that progress often comes from challenging the status quo and asking uncomfortable questions. In today's world, where information overload is the norm, the ability to think critically and question assumptions is more valuable than ever. And let's not forget those emperors, the power brokers of the ancient world. Figures like Augustus, who reigned from 27 BC to AD 14, transformed Rome from a republic into an empire, setting the stage for centuries of Roman dominance. Augustus' reign brought about the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability that lasted over 2 centuries. It was a time when Roman roads crisscrossed the empire, facilitating trade, communication, and the spread of ideas, an ancient precursor to globalization. But beneath the veneer of peace, the Roman Empire was a hotbed of intrigue, ambition, and yes, corruption. The emperors wielded immense power, but their reigns were often precarious, dependent on the whims of the Senate, the military, and the populace. Augustus himself was a master of political spin, carefully crafting his image as a benevolent ruler while consolidating power behind the scenes. Sound familiar? The political machinations of ancient Rome aren't so different from today's power struggles, where image often trumps substance, and leaders must navigate a delicate balance of alliances and public perception. So, why do we still care about these ancient figures and their empires? Because they offer us a mirror, reflecting the complexities of power, ambition, and human nature. They remind us that while the trappings of civilization may change, the fundamental drivers of human behavior, our desires for power, legacy, and understanding, remain constant. The pyramids, philosophers, and emperors of the ancient world are not relics of a distant past. They are part of an ongoing dialogue about what it means to be human. In a world that's constantly hurtling forward, history provides us with a tether to our roots, a way to ground ourselves in the continuity of human experience. It challenges us to learn from the past, while daring us to imagine a future that's worthy of the legacies we've inherited. So, the next time you find yourself standing in awe of a towering skyscraper or lost in thought over a philosophical conundrum, remember that you're part of a long line of dreamers and thinkers, builders and rulers who have shaped, and continue to shape, the course of history. In the end, history isn't just a dusty record of what was. It's a living conversation about what is and what could be. And that's a story worth telling, again and again. Beneath the grandeur of ancient Roman architecture, with its marble columns and sprawling forums, beat the heart of a bustling economy that would make even Wall Street brokers break a sweat. Yes, folks, Rome wasn't built in a day, but the cash flow was as fast-paced as a chariot race. And speaking of chariots, let's talk about the people who filled those streets. The Romans, a society so adept at commerce that they could probably sell sand to a desert dweller. First up, the toga, the iconic symbol of Roman citizenry. Now, if you think your closet's got some expensive suits, wait till you hear about this. A decent toga could set you back around 100 denarii. For context, a Roman soldier's annual salary was about 900 denarii. So, wrapping yourself in one of these fashion statements could cost you more than a month's wages. That's like blowing your salary on a designer suit, except you might also end up smelling like a wool factory. And let's not forget the whole toga affair was like an ancient version of a fashion faux pas waiting to happen. Darn it improperly, and you were the laughingstock of the forum. But how did all these togas and other goods get to Rome in the first place? That's where our old friend trade comes in. The Roman economy was the original global marketplace, long before Amazon Prime. They had trade networks stretching from Britain to India, with ships crisscrossing the Mediterranean like it was the neighborhood swimming pool. From olive oil and wine to spices and silks, if it could be bought or sold, the Romans were on it. They even imported exotic animals for their famous circuses, because who wouldn't want to see a giraffe in a gladiator arena? Now, one of the biggest myths about Roman trade is the notion of a seamless, efficient system. In reality, it was more like a series of bureaucratic hurdles that would make a DMV line look like a walk in the park. Taxes, tariffs, and bribes were the name of the game. Just ask any merchant who tried to get goods through customs. And speaking of customs, Rome had its own version of the IRS. Tax collectors, or publicani, were notorious for their ruthlessness, often squeezing every last denarius they could from the populace. It's a wonder anyone had money left for a glass of vino. But let's not get too distracted by the glitz and glamour. The economic engine of Rome wasn't just a well-oiled machine. It was also a reflection of its societal structure. The rich got richer, and the poor, well, they mostly stayed poor. The vast majority of the Roman workforce were slaves, performing the grueling labor that kept the economy ticking. From building roads to working in mines, slaves were the unsung heroes of Roman prosperity. And don't let those epic tales of gladiators fool you. Most slaves weren't battling in the Colosseum for glory. They were stuck in the trenches, quite literally. Speaking of gladiators, let's debunk another myth. While they were the rock stars of ancient Rome, their lives were far from glamorous. Most were slaves or condemned criminals, trained to fight to the death for the entertainment of the masses. The average lifespan of a gladiator was short, and their fame was a double-edged sword. Win enough battles, and you might earn your freedom, but more often than not, it was a bloody and brutal end. So, next time you hear someone say they want to live like a Roman gladiator, remind them it wasn't all glory and games. Amidst all the economic activity, the political landscape played a crucial role. The Senate and emperors weren't just passive observers. They were as involved in commerce as any modern-day politician in a board meeting. From implementing tariffs to constructing infrastructure, their policies could make or break fortunes. Take Augustus, Rome's first emperor, who reigned from 27 BC to AD 14. He instituted reforms that stabilized the economy and increased trade efficiency, all while consolidating his power. Talk about multitasking. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite its vast economic might, Rome's economy was not immune to crises. Inflation, currency devaluation, and even banking failures were part of the Roman experience. By the 3rd century AD, the denarius was so devalued that it was practically worthless. The empire was forced to rely on bartering, a far cry from its former commercial glory. So, when you hear someone lament about modern economic woes, remember that even the Romans faced financial turmoil. In the end, the Roman economy was a complex web of trade, politics, and societal dynamics. Its legacy is a testament to human ingenuity and the relentless pursuit of prosperity. So next time you sip on a glass of wine or marvel at a piece of fine silk, tip your hat to the Romans. They were the original masters of the trade game, and their economic impact is still felt today. And if you're lucky enough to own a toga, just remember, wear it right, or you might end up the butt of history's jokes. So, let's leave the Romans behind, still trying to get those togas right, and shift our gaze to Egypt, where pyramids and pharaohs loom large. Now, if you've been picturing ancient Egypt as a land of golden sands and serene pharaohs gliding along the Nile, let's pump the brakes on that chariot. Behind those iconic pyramids lies a civilization that was as complex as it was captivating. Sure, they had a thing for cats, but their society was more about hierarchy than felines. First off, those pyramids didn't just pop up overnight like some ancient mirage. They were the result of an elaborate political and social machine that would make any modern campaign manager envious. The pharaohs, those god kings who ruled over the land, were not just sipping on date wine and lounging in their palaces. They were busy crafting an image of divine power that would put today's social media influencers to shame. Pharaohs were depicted as living gods, and their PR game was as sharp as a sphinx's claw. These rulers understood the power of imagery and propaganda long before the term existed. They commissioned grand monuments and temples to showcase their might and divine right to rule. Forget Instagram likes. Back then, it was all about how many obelisks bore your name. Now, let's talk about economics, because those stones didn't move themselves. It took a workforce as large as the cast of a Hollywood epic to pull off these architectural feats. Contrary to popular myth, the pyramids weren't built by slaves. Thanks to recent archaeological finds, we know that many of the laborers were actually paid workers. Imagine them as the ancient equivalent of contractors, except their tools were more stone chisel than power drill. These workers were organized into teams, provided with housing, food, and beer. Yes, beer, because even in ancient times, a cold brew was the nectar of productivity. The workers were fed a diet of bread, onions, and radishes, which might sound like a questionable meal plan, but it was enough to keep them hauling those massive stones. Speaking of stone hauling, let's debunk another myth, the notion that pyramids were built with brute force alone. The Egyptians were nothing if not ingenious. They utilized a system of sledges and lubrication. Yep, they greased the skids with water to move the stones. This technique reduced friction, making it easier to drag those multi-ton blocks across the desert. It's like the original version of WD-40, minus the aerosol can. Behind this monumental labor effort was a well-oiled bureaucratic machine that would put any modern government to shame. Ancient Egypt had a sophisticated system of administration, with scribes meticulously recording supplies and logistics. These guys were the accountants of antiquity, ensuring that everything from grain stores to tomb construction was in order. They wielded their pens with the precision of a master surgeon, recording transactions and keeping the economic wheels turning. Now, let's address the feline in the room, cats. The Egyptians didn't just like cats, they revered them. Cats were considered sacred, and harming one was a serious crime, punishable by death, no less. They were associated with the goddess Bastet, protector of the home and symbol of fertility and motherhood. The love for these four-legged deities was so intense that they were often mummified and buried with their owners. Today, we might have pet cemeteries, but back then, it was a full-on feline funeral procession. However, it wasn't all purrs and pyramids. The social hierarchy in Egypt was as rigid as the stones of Giza. At the top sat the pharaoh, surrounded by a web of nobles and priests who helped maintain this divine order. Beneath them were the scribes and officials, the middle management of ancient Egypt, if you will. Then came the farmers, craftsmen, and laborers, the backbone of the economy. And while these folks were essential to Egypt's prosperity, they had little say in how things were run. Let's just say upward mobility wasn't exactly a concept they were familiar with. Religion played a crucial role in maintaining this societal structure. The Egyptians believed in a pantheon of gods, each with its own quirks and responsibilities. The afterlife was a big deal, and getting there required a first-class ticket, which included being mummified and buried with all the essentials for the journey. This belief system reinforced the power of the pharaoh and the state, as temples and religious ceremonies were intricately linked to the political fabric of the nation. But what about the everyday Egyptians? For the average Joe, or perhaps average Jahai, life was a balance between work, worship, and community. While the pharaohs were busy immortalizing themselves in stone, the common folk were more concerned with the annual flooding of the Nile. This natural phenomenon was both a blessing and a curse. When the Nile flooded its banks, it deposited rich silt on the fields, allowing for bountiful harvests. But too much or too little water could spell disaster. This reliance on the river turned agriculture into a communal effort, with entire villages working together to manage irrigation and harvests. Now, you might think that with all this farming and pyramid building, the Egyptians had no time for leisure. Wrong. They were quite the connoisseurs of fun. From board games like Senate to elaborate banquets, they knew how to unwind. Dancing and music were central to their festivities, with harps, lyres, and flutes setting the scene. And if you think your modern dance moves are impressive, just remember that the Egyptians had already perfected the art of the shimmy thousands of years ago. In the grand tapestry of history, ancient Egypt stands out as a civilization of contrasts. Divine rulers and diligent workers, stone monuments and flowing rivers. It was a society that thrived on hierarchy and order, with every individual playing a part in the cosmic balance. As we delve deeper into this ancient world, keep in mind that while the pharaohs may have worn the crowns, it was the everyday Egyptians who truly wore the weight of their civilization. And that, my friends, is a pyramid scheme we can all learn from. And speaking of schemes, let's set sail across the Aegean Sea to the land of democracy's birth certificate, ancient Greece. But before you start imagining toga-clad philosophers casting votes under the shade of olive trees, let's pump the brakes. Democracy in ancient Athens wasn't exactly a beacon of modern egalitarianism. In fact, it was more like a VIP club with a very selective guest list. Imagine a political system where only free male citizens over the age of 18 could participate. About 30, 000 out of a population of 300, 000. That's right, women, slaves, and foreigners need not apply. So if you think modern voter suppression tactics are something new, think again. Now, let's talk about the original trial by jury. Forget binge-watching courtroom dramas. This was the real deal. In Athens, your fate could be decided by a jury that made Judge Judy look like a walk in the park. Anywhere from 200 to 6,000 jurors, all ready to pass judgment. And here's the kicker. They were paid for their civic duty, a whopping 3 arbals a day. That's about half a day's wage for an unskilled worker, so not exactly rolling in drachmas. The Athenians took their legal system seriously, perhaps because it was one of the few chances the average Joe, or average Iason, had a say in anything. But don't romanticize it too much. These juries were swayed by rhetoric more than evidence, and famous orators could charm their way to a favorable verdict faster than you can say Socrates. Yet, the economic inequality in ancient Greece would feel eerily familiar to today's society. While the rich lounged in luxurious symposiums, sipping wine and discussing philosophy, the poor scraped by on barley and fish. The wealth gap was as wide as the Acropolis is high. Land ownership was the name of the game, and those without it were often left in the dust, working as tenant farmers or laborers. The rich could afford to finance triremes, warships that were the ancient equivalent of a private jet, while the poor were lucky to keep their sandals intact. But let's not forget the philosophical heavyweights who were busy shaping Western thought. Enter Plato, who was arguably the original hipster, always questioning the status quo. He hung out in the Athenian equivalent of indie coffee shops, pondering the nature of reality and sipping on a mean cup of skepticism. In his Republic, Plato envisioned a society ruled by philosopher kings, because who better to lead than those who spent their days contemplating the abstract? Sure, he was a bit of a dreamer, but his ideas laid the groundwork for centuries of philosophical debate. Meanwhile, Socrates, his mentor, roamed the streets engaging in what we now call Socratic seminars, asking probing questions that left young Athenians questioning everything from morality to the meaning of life. Unfortunately, his penchant for questioning authority didn't win him any popularity contests. Charged with corrupting the youth and impiety, Socrates was sentenced to death by a jury that probably didn't appreciate his relentless questioning. He accepted his fate with a cup of hemlock, proving that even in ancient Greece, being a contrarian could be a risky business. Aristotle, Plato's student, was no slouch either. He tackled everything from biology to politics, leaving no stone unturned in his quest for knowledge. While his teacher, Plato, was busy with ideals, Aristotle was more of a pragmatist, focusing on the tangible world. He laid the foundation for empirical science, categorizing plants and animals with the zeal of a naturalist on a caffeine high. His work on logic and ethics influenced countless generations, making him the intellectual equivalent of a rock star. But why did these philosophical debates matter? Because they weren't just abstract musings. They questioned the very fabric of society. What is justice? What is the best way to live? These questions rippled through time, influencing how societies viewed governance, ethics, and the human condition. The philosophers of ancient Greece weren't just ivory tower intellectuals. They were the original influencers, shaping thought long before hashtags and retweets. Now, let's dive into another myth, the idea of a united Greece. The truth is, ancient Greece was more like a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own government and culture. Athens and Sparta were the headlining act, but they were as different as chalk and cheese. Athens was the intellectual hub, a cradle of democracy and culture, while Sparta was a militaristic society that valued discipline above all. The rivalry between these two powers was the stuff of legend, culminating in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that lasted over 27 years and left Greece in tatters. So, as you can see, ancient Greece was far more complex than the romanticized vision of philosophers in white robes debating under temple shadows. It was a land of stark contrasts, democratic ideals and social hierarchies, philosophical brilliance and economic disparities. The legacy of Greece is a testament to the power of ideas and the enduring human struggle for balance and justice. As we wrap up this journey through the ancient world, remember that while the Greeks might have given us the blueprint for democracy, they also left us with the lesson that no system is perfect. And that, my friends, is a piece of wisdom as timeless as Plato's musings. Now let's pivot our historical compass and set sail for the Far East, where ancient China was busy writing its own epic saga long before Marco Polo ever dreamed of noodles. Imagine a land where the Great Wall wasn't just an architectural marvel, but the biggest keep out sign in history, visible from space, and a testament to China's ancient brand of tough love diplomacy. This was an era when emperors had to juggle more than just court politics. They had to unite a kaleidoscope of cultures under one roof, a feat that makes herding cats look like child's play. First up, we need to tackle that Great Wall of China, a structure so legendary that it makes other world wonders feel like DIY weekend projects. Stretching over 13,000 miles, with its earliest sections dating back to the 7th century BC, the wall was the ultimate deterrent against nomadic invasions. But let's bust a common myth. The Great Wall wasn't a single continuous barrier, like some colossal stone snake slithering across the landscape. It was a series of walls and fortifications built by different dynasties, each adding their own spin to the ultimate in defensive architecture. So, while it wasn't perfect, it was the ancient equivalent of a high-stakes game of Risk, where losing could mean an entire city sacked by the Xiongnu or other marauding tribes. Fast forward to the Qin dynasty, circa 221 BC, when China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, decided that a unified wall was just the ticket to securing his empire. Qin Shi Huang wasn't just an emperor, he was the original overachiever. He standardized weights, measures, and even the width of cart axles, a control freak's dream. He also had a penchant for burning books and burying scholars alive, which gives new meaning to the phrase, knowledge is power. But his crowning achievement was undoubtedly his contribution to the Great Wall, marshalling hundreds of thousands of laborers to fortify the empire's northern borders. The workforce consisted of soldiers, peasants, and prisoners, a motley crew that toiled under harsh conditions. The mortality rate was so high that the wall earned the grim nickname, the longest cemetery on Earth. But the wall was just one piece of the empire's puzzle. Enter the Silk Road, the ancient world's version of the internet, minus the cat videos. This vast network of trade routes, stretching over 4,000 miles from China to the Mediterranean, was less a single road and more a sprawling web of pathways that connected diverse cultures and economies. It was the Silk Road that turned China into a global economic powerhouse, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and even diseases long before anyone knew what quarantine meant. Silk was the star of this trade show, the ancient world's must-have luxury item. By the time of the Han Dynasty, 206 BC to add 220, silk production was a closely guarded secret, as valuable as a modern-day tech patent. The Chinese had mastered the art of sericulture, with a production process so intricate that it involved feeding silkworms mulberry leaves and then unwinding the cocoon's thread to create this lustrous fabric. The demand for silk was insatiable, and it became the currency of choice along the trade routes. But it wasn't just silk that traveled the Silk Road. Spices, precious stones, and even paper made their way west, while horses, glassware, and gold flowed east. It was a global marketplace long before anyone uttered the phrase supply chain management. Yet, let's not romanticize this ancient trade network too much. The Silk Road was no Sunday stroll through the marketplace. It was fraught with dangers. Traders faced harsh climates, bandits, and political instability at every turn. The journey from Xin to Rome could take over a year, assuming you weren't relieved of your goods or your life by some enterprising bandit along the way. But for those who dared, the rewards were as rich as the silks they carried. Economically, the Silk Road was a game changer. It wasn't just about moving goods. It was about moving ideas and cultures. Buddhism, for instance, traveled from India to China along these routes, finding fertile ground in a land ripe for spiritual exploration. The exchange wasn't one way either. Chinese innovations, like paper-making and gunpowder, made their way to the West, where they would eventually spark their own revolutions. In a way, the Silk Road was the world's first information superhighway, paving the way for cultural exchange centuries before anyone even considered building a library or a university. But for all its grandeur, ancient China's social fabric was as complex as the patterns on its legendary silks. The emperors might have been at the top, but they were supported by a vast bureaucracy that made the IRS look like a lemonade stand. These bureaucrats, or mandarins, were selected through rigorous examinations, a grueling process that could make even the most dedicated student question their life choices. This meritocratic system was a double-edged sword. It ensured a level of competence in governance, but also created a rigid hierarchy that left little room for social mobility. Speaking of hierarchies, let's dive into the social strata of ancient China. At the top sat the emperor, a figure as revered as he was feared, believed to be the son of heaven with a divine mandate to rule. Below him were the nobles and officials, the mandarins who kept the empire's gears turning. Then came the peasants who, despite being the backbone of the economy, were often as overlooked as a farmer in a city council meeting. They worked the land, producing the rice and wheat that fed the empire's millions. Yet, for all their toil, they had little say in the political machinations of the day. The artisans and craftsmen came next, valued for their skills, but still subject to the whims of those above. At the bottom were the merchants, seen as necessary evils in the grand scheme of things. Their wealth was often viewed with suspicion, as the Confucian ideal placed farmers above traders in terms of societal value. After all, who needed a new jade bracelet when there were mouths to feed and fields to plow? Confucianism itself played a pivotal role in maintaining this social order. The teachings of Confucius, who lived from 551 to 479 BC, emphasized hierarchy, duty, and respect for one's elders, a moral guidebook that kept the societal machine well-oiled. This wasn't just a philosophical exercise. It was a practical framework that reinforced the emperor's authority and ensured the stability of the state. However, this rigid structure also meant that innovation was often stifled, as the weight of tradition held firm against the tides of change. But let's not forget the flip side of this coin. The rich tapestry of Chinese culture was woven with threads of innovation and artistry. The Han Dynasty was a period of scientific advancement, with innovations like the seismograph and water-powered armillary sphere. Literature and poetry flourished, with works that continue to inspire today. In medicine, the concept of yin and yang emerged, a holistic approach that sought balance in all things, a philosophy that could serve us well in our own chaotic times. So, as we journey through the corridors of ancient China, it's clear that this civilization was as multifaceted as the jade it prized. From the grandeur of the Great Wall to the bustling trade of the Silk Road, China was a land of contrasts, of emperors and peasants, of innovation and tradition. It was a society that managed to unite diverse cultures under one roof, a feat that speaks to the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. And while we may not have the internet to connect us in those days, the legacy of China's ancient globalism is still felt today, reminding us that the world has always been a smaller place than we might think. Stay tuned, because there's more to come as we continue our historical journey through the ages. And now, we leave behind the grand tapestry of China's ancient innovations and turn our gaze to Mesopotamia, often hailed as the cradle of civilization. Now, if you're picturing serene ziggurats and peaceful canals, hold that thought. This was a land where the phrase, civilization is hard work, might as well have been carved in cuneiform on every clay tablet. Forget about leisurely strolls along the Euphrates. This was where human ingenuity met the gritty reality of survival. Let's start with the Sumerians, the original overachievers of ancient history. Around 3000 BC, they were already busy inventing writing, or at least the precursor to it. Cuneiform wasn't just about jarring down sharping lists. It was the Swiss army knife of communication, used for everything from recording epic tales to calculating crop yields. Picture accountants hunched over clay tablets, not laptops, keeping track of every barley, grain, and goat. This wasn't just bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It was the backbone of an agricultural economy that supported sprawling city-states like Uruk and Ur. Economics in Mesopotamia wasn't just about trading shiny trinkets. It was a complex system of bartering goods and services, with silver rings often serving as the currency of choice. Imagine a bustling market where you could trade a bushel of barley for a jar of olive oil, or perhaps a head of cattle for some fine wool. And it wasn't just local commerce. These folks were the original import-export moguls, trading with regions as distant as the Indus Valley. Trade wasn't just a luxury, it was a lifeline, connecting disparate cultures long before anyone thought to call it globalization. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The Sumerians weren't just dreamy poets and savvy traders. They were masters of administration, with a penchant for detail that would make a modern bureaucrat blush. The Code of Ur-Nam, dating back to around 2100 BC, was one of the first sets of laws, laying down the rules of the land with the precision of an ancient legal eagle. It wasn't just about justice. It was about keeping the societal machine running smoothly. This was the precursor to Hammurabi's Code, a legal document so comprehensive that it makes modern law books look like pamphlets. Speaking of Hammurabi, let's talk about this Babylonian king who reigned from 1792 to 1750 BC. Hammurabi's Code was the ancient world's version of a Twitter thread, laying out 282 laws that covered everything from theft to the price of beer. Yes, even back then, the cost of a cold brew was a hot topic. The famous eye for an eye principle wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a legal doctrine that ensured the punishment fit the crime, at least theoretically. And while this might sound harsh, it was actually a step forward in ensuring that justice wasn't just meted out by whoever had the biggest army. But what about the hanging gardens of Babylon, you ask? Ah, the elusive wonder that has captivated imaginations for centuries. Were they real or just ancient propaganda? While many historians think the gardens were a work of fiction, possibly confused with the lush terraces of Nineveh, the legend is appealing. They were said to be built by King Nebuchadnezzar Roman II for his homesick wife, Amadis, who missed the green hills of her homeland. Picture a terraced paradise with cascading waterfalls, exotic plants, and enough flora to make even the most seasoned gardener green with envy. Yet, the harsh reality is, there's no concrete archaeological evidence that these gardens ever existed in Babylon. It's a classic case of ancient fake news, but one that's proven too enchanting to let go. Whether real or imagined, the gardens symbolize the human desire to create beauty amidst chaos, a theme as timeless as history itself. Now, let's not forget the practical side of Mesopotamian life. This was a society that thrived on the fertile banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, rivers that were both a blessing and a curse. The annual floods deposited rich silt, perfect for agriculture, but managing water was a full-time job. Enter the irrigation systems, the ancient equivalent of modern infrastructure projects. These canals and dikes weren't just about watering crops. They were a testament to human ingenuity and cooperation. But let's talk about the social structure, which was as stratified as a Babylonian ziggurat. At the top sat the king, often seen as a divine figure, with priests and nobles just below him. These were the power brokers, the ancient 1%, if you will. Beneath them were the merchants, artisans, and scribes, the middle class, who kept the economy humming. At the bottom of the pile were the farmers and laborers, whose hard work fed the city-states, but who had little say in the grand scheme of things. And let's not sugarcoat it. Slavery was an accepted part of the social order, a stark reminder of the inequities that have persisted through time. Religion was the glue that held this society together. The Mesopotamians were polytheistic, worshipping a pantheon of gods who could be as unpredictable as the weather. Each city had its patron deity, and temples were the heart of social and economic life. These ziggurats weren't just places of worship. They were administrative centers, storing grain and wealth, and serving as a hub for community activities. The priests wielded significant power, acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people, a role that kept them firmly in the societal hierarchy. As we wrap up our journey through Mesopotamia, it's clear that this was a civilization of firsts: writing, legal codes, urban planning. They laid the groundwork for what we now consider essential components of a functioning society. But beyond the achievements and innovations, the real legacy of Mesopotamia is its testament to human resilience and creativity. It was a land where necessity was the mother of invention, where people carved out a sophisticated civilization from the mud of the riverbanks. In the end, the story of Mesopotamia is a reminder that civilization is an ever-evolving tapestry, woven from the threads of human endeavor, ambition, and imagination. From the humble beginnings of cuneiform to the grandiose legends of the Hanging Gardens, their legacy continues to resonate with us today. As you drift off into sleep, perhaps dreaming of ancient wonders and bustling markets, remember that the echoes of these early innovators still shape our world in ways both seen and unseen. So here's to Mesopotamia, the original startup of civilization, where even the smallest clay tablet told a story worth remembering. In the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers decided to play nice, ancient Mesopotamia sprouted like an overachieving plant in an overwatered garden. Around 3200 BCE, these folks weren't just mucking about with mud bricks and irrigation ditches. They were laying the groundwork for the first urban centers. And by groundwork, I mean they were literally inventing writing, a nifty little system called cuneiform. Now, before you roll your eyes at the thought of ancient spreadsheets, let's dive into how this scribbling business changed the game. Cuneiform wasn't just the ancient equivalent of a sticky note. It was the OG of record keeping, helping Sumerian bureaucrats track everything from temple donations to the amount of beer owed to workers. Yeah, you heard that right. Beer was a serious business in Mesopotamia. A day's wage for a laborer could get you a hearty jug of it, plus a loaf of bread. Not exactly a Michelin star menu, but consider it the ancient version of a happy hour special. The Sumerians had priorities, and apparently a frothy pint was right up there with food and shelter. Now, let's talk about these urban centers. Places like Uruk, and Lagash weren't just a bunch of huts thrown together. Uruk, for instance, was bustling with over 50,000 people at its peak. That's like cramming a small modern city into a space without Wi-Fi or air conditioning. Yet these cities had ziggurats. Think of them as the skyscrapers of the ancient world, except with more guards and fewer office cubicles. These towering structures symbolized religious devotion and power, basically saying, our guards are bigger than yours. Speaking of power, let's not forget the kings and their epic tales. Enter Gilgamesh, the rock star of Mesopotamian mythology. Story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is like the ancient world's blockbuster movie, full of drama, friendship, and existential crises. Gilgamesh was supposedly the king of Uruk, part god, part human, and all ego. The epic tells of his adventures with his buddy Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods to keep Gilgamesh's arrogance in check. Spoiler alert. Things get messy, and Enkidu ends up on the wrong side of alive, sending Gilgamesh on a quest for immortality. Now, here's where the plot thickens, or thins, depending on how you look at it. While the epic is a treasure trove of cultural insights, its historical accuracy is, shall we say, questionable. Gilgamesh might have been a real king, but his two-thirds divine ancestry, not so much. Yet the tale gives us a peek into the values and fears of the Sumerians, a civilization grappling with the mysteries of life, death, and the afterlife. It's like their version of grappling with the meaning of life, only with more epic floods and less existential dread. But back to the gritty reality of Mesopotamia. The invention of writing didn't just revolutionize communication, it cemented the social hierarchy. Those who could read and write, mainly priests and scribes, held the keys to power, quite literally. They were the ones who could decipher the stars, interpret the will of the gods, and most importantly, keep tabs on the beer rations. Riding was power, and in a world where the gods could be as temperamental as the weather, it paid to be in the know. So, next time you jot down a grocery list or fire off a text, give a nod to those scribes in Mesopotamia who started it all. They were the original influencers, shaping society one clay tablet at a time. And while we may have swapped ziggurats for skyscrapers and cuneiform for emojis, the essence remains the same. Communication is the backbone of civilization. Whether you're deciphering ancient myths or just trying to figure out who owes you a drink, it's all part of the human story. And just when you thought ancient civilizations had cornered the market on ingenuity, we flipped the script to ancient Egypt, a land where the pyramids weren't just colossal heaps of limestone, but more like the ancient world's version of a trillion-dollar infrastructure project. Forget the notion that these mighty edifices were simply the whims of egotistical pharaohs. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was less about vanity and more akin to a national employment scheme on steroids. It wasn't just a pile of rocks, but a massive economic engine that revved up Egypt's economy quicker than you can say Nile Delta. First, let's dispel the notion that the pyramids were built by whip-cracking slave drivers. Contrary to popular Hollywood narratives, these weren't the unfortunate souls shackled in chains, but actually a workforce of skilled laborers who probably had a better benefits package than some modern freelancers. Evidence suggests that around 20,000 to 30,000 workers were involved, getting paid in bread, beer, and a solid sense of national pride for their Herculean efforts. Imagine being part of a project so grand that its shadow stretches across millennia. That's a legacy you can't buy on Etsy. Now, let's talk numbers because, let's face it, the pyramids are nothing if not a numerical marvel. The Great Pyramid alone is comprised of approximately 3 million blocks, each weighing anywhere from 5 to 15 tons. That's like stacking up a giant, ancient Lego set, except each piece weighs as much as an SUV. And they didn't have the luxury of cranes or modern machinery. Nope, just good old-fashioned elbow grease, ingenuity, and possibly a few choice words for the foremen. The construction wasn't just about stacking stones. It was a well-oiled machine of logistics and planning. The quarries were buzzing with activity, as were the workshops where artisans crafted the tools of the trade. It was a full-fledged economic stimulus package that spread wealth and resources across the region. You could say that Pharaoh Khufu, the mastermind behind the Great Pyramid, was the ancient world's version of a Keynesian economist, stimulating demand through massive public works. Except instead of tax cuts, you got a monumental tombstone visible from space. But why go to all this trouble for a tomb? Well, here's where myth and reality dance a curious waltz. The pharaohs were seen as living gods, their divine right to rule etched into the sands of time. The pyramids served as a testament to their godlike status, a way to ensure their journey to the afterlife was as smooth as an Egyptian cotton sheet. It's the ultimate expression of you can't take it with you. Unless, of course, you're a pharaoh, in which case you build a pyramid and take the whole shebang. The allure of the pyramids also lies in their architectural precision. The Great Pyramid's base is almost perfectly level, with a margin of error less than 2 inches across its 756-foot sides. The alignment with the cardinal points is so precise that it would give any modern surveyor a run for their money. It raises the question, how did they pull this off without GPS or lasers? Some suggest the stars guided them, a celestial blueprint for earthly endeavors. Others propose more practical methods, like water-filled trenches to ensure level surfaces. Either way, it's a testament to human ingenuity, and the lengths will go to leave a mark on history. Now, let's pivot to hieroglyphics, those enigmatic symbols that whisper tales of a bygone era. Far from mere decoration, these inscriptions were the lifeblood of Egyptian bureaucracy, religion, and culture. They were the tweets and status updates of their day, chronicling everything from tax collection to divine decrees. And while they might look like doodles fit for a papyrus comic strip, they were a sophisticated system of phonetic and ideographic symbols. It took the better part of 1000 symbols to form a comprehensive lexicon, which makes our 26-letter alphabet seem positively lazy. Hieroglyphics also give us insight into what the Egyptians thought of their pharaohs. Spoiler alert, They were kind of a big deal. Pharaohs were depicted as both human and divine, a bridge between the mortal realm and the gods. Their deeds were immortalized not just in stone, but in the hearts and minds of their subjects. It's like a millennia-old PR campaign, carefully crafted to ensure the pharaoh's legacy endured long after the sands reclaimed their monuments. Yet, beneath the surface of divine reverence lay a complex web of politics and power plays. The pharaohs may have been seen as divine, but they were also savvy statesmen, or women. Let's not forget Hatshepsut, who knew how to wield power and maintain order. Their rule was underpinned by a vast bureaucratic machine that managed everything from agricultural output to military conquests. In a way, the pyramids and hieroglyphics are twin pillars of Egyptian civilization, one a testament to their engineering prowess, the other a window into their spiritual and political life. As we wrap up this tale of desert sands and towering stones, remember that the story of ancient Egypt is one of both awe-inspiring achievements and the very human desires for power, legacy, and immortality. The pyramids stand not just as monuments to the past, but as reminders of our eternal quest to understand our place in the cosmos. And as we continue to decode the hieroglyphics and explore the mysteries of these ancient wonders, we step a little closer to unraveling the intricate tapestry of human history. But don't fret, there's plenty more to uncover in this journey through time. Stay tuned as we dig deeper into Egypt's rich past, one hieroglyphic at a time. Moving from the Egyptian sands to the rocky shores of Greece, let's dive into the birthplace of democracy, where the Acropolis wasn't just a pretty ruin, but the beating heart of a city that dared to redefine governance. Ancient Athens, circa the 5th century BCE, was a hotbed of ideas and debates, a place where citizens, well, the male ones at least, could exercise their right to speak out. Now, let's not get misty-eyed just yet. Athenian democracy wasn't exactly the egalitarian wonderland we imagine. In a city of about 300,000, only around 30,000 were considered full citizens, and if you thought women, slaves, or foreigners had a say, you'd be sorely mistaken. It was democracy, but with a lot of asterisks. Athens was a city where philosophy flourished like olives on a hillside. Socrates, the man who put the why in everything, was known for his habit of questioning the status quo until it snapped. Plato, his star student, and Aristotle, the philosophical heavyweight, were busy laying the groundwork for Western thought. But before you picture serene academies and endless debates, remember this. These guys were kind of the rock stars of their day. Philosophical discussions could draw crowds bigger than a modern TED talk, and ideas were the currency of the intellectual elite. Meanwhile, over in Sparta, life couldn't have been more different. Imagine a society where the gym was practically a holy site, and the phrase, no pain, no gain, was a way of life. Spartan society revolved around military prowess, every male citizen expected to become a soldier from the tender age of 7. That's right. While Athenian kids were learning rhetoric and geometry, Spartan boys were mastering the fine art of dodging spears. The agoge, their rigorous education and training program, was less about reading and more about surviving. The Spartan economy was based on a system called the kleros, where land was distributed among citizens, and the helots, essentially serfs, worked the fields. Spartans kept their economy simple, relying on iron bars as currency. Coins were for softies, apparently. This austere lifestyle extended to their homes and clothing. Luxury was seen as a distraction from duty. And let's not forget their women, who enjoyed more freedom than their Athenian counterparts. Spartan women ran the households and even received physical training, because, as the saying went, only Spartan women give birth to real men. While Athens and Sparta had their differences, they shared one cultural phenomenon that united the Greeks, the Olympic Games. Held every 4 years from 776 BCE in Olympia, these games were the ancient world's Super Bowl, except with more nudity and fewer commercials. Athletes from various city-states competed for glory, not medals, but olive wreaths, and more importantly, the kind of fame that could catapult you into political office. Winning a chariot race wasn't just about speed, it was a ticket to influence. Victors were celebrated with poems, statues, and sometimes free meals for life. Talk about dining out on your achievements, but let's debunk the myth of the noble athlete competing for the love of sport. These games were as much about politics and prestige as they were about athleticism. City-states used the games to display their power and wealth, commissioning grandiose temples and statues at Olympia. It was less about the Olympic spirit and more about flexing your city-state's muscles in stone and marble. And while the games promoted unity, they also stoked rivalries. Wars were paused for the games, but the competitive spirit often spilled into the battlefield afterward. As for the reality of the games themselves, they were a mix of honor and chaos. Forget the sanitized image of the modern Olympics. These events were brutal. Boxing involved leather straps studded with metal, and the pancration, an ancient form of MMA, had almost no rules. It was less about technique and more about survival. And while athletes trained rigorously, the lack of modern medicine meant injuries were common, and retirement could come swiftly and painfully. So, what do Athens and Sparta teach us about human nature? Well, for starters, that there's more than one way to build a civilization. Athens, with its open debates and philosophical pursuits, showed the power of ideas to shape society. Sparta, with its focus on discipline and unity, demonstrated the strength of collective effort. Both had their myths and their realities, their romantic allure and their harsher truths. In the end, the story of ancient Greece isn't just about democracy or militarism. It's about the diverse ways humans have sought to organize themselves in pursuit of greatness. Whether through the power of the mind or the strength of the body, the Greeks left a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire. As we leave the ancient world behind and sail towards new horizons, remember that the lessons of Athens and Sparta are as relevant today as they were over 2 millennia ago. Stay tuned as we continue this epic journey through history. Just as the Greek world showed us that there's more than one way to run a society, we now journey to the Roman Empire, a colossal stage where politics was as much blood sport as any gladiatorial game. Rome, where emperors strutted like peacocks in togas, is a tale of grandeur and grit. From the chaotic corridors of power to the vast network of roads that made Rome the ancient world's Google Maps, we're about to dive into the empire that burned bright and burned out. Let's kick things off with the emperors, those larger-than-life figures who ruled with a mix of iron fists and occasional lunacy. Take Caligula, for instance, who once declared war on Neptune, the god of the sea, and ordered his soldiers to collect seashells as spoils. Not exactly a masterclass in military strategy, but it does make for a memorable footnote. And who could forget Nero, the fiddle-playing pyromaniac who allegedly torched Rome just to make room for his new palace? These rulers were more chaotic than a soap opera plot, and yet they were pivotal in shaping the empire. Behind the chaos, however, was a political machine that ran on intrigue, bribery, and the occasional assassination. The Roman Senate, supposedly a bastion of wisdom and governance, was often a hotbed of scheming that would make a modern political thriller look tame. Positions of power were bought and sold like vintage wines, with the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's personal bodyguards, playing kingmaker more than once. In 193 C, they auctioned off the imperial throne to the highest bidder, Didius Julianus, for a cool 25,000 sesterces per soldier. That's one way to do a hostile takeover. But Rome wasn't just about who sat on the throne. Its real power lay in its infrastructure. Roman roads weren't just paths. They were the empire's arteries, pumping trade and troops across continents. Over 400,000 kilometers of road stretched from the sultry sands of Africa to the icy frontiers of Britannia. Talk about a road trip. The Appian Way, Rome's first major highway constructed in 312 BCE, was a marvel of engineering. It was so cleverly built that remnants of it are still in use today. Eat your heart out. Modern road builders. These roads weren't merely feats of engineering, but also economic lifelines. They facilitated the movement of goods, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Hispania, grain from Egypt. Rome was the original global marketplace, with its roads as the checkout lanes. The construction of these roads was a massive undertaking, employing thousands of soldiers and slaves. It was Julius Caesar who famously quipped that all roads lead to Rome, and he wasn't just being poetic. Roads were the backbone of Rome's military might, allowing legions to march across territories with speed and efficiency that would make any logistics manager weep with envy. And then there were the games. The games, where human life was cheaper than a loaf of bread. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE under Emperor Titus, could seat up to 50,000 spectators, all eager to watch gladiators fight to the death. But these spectacles were more than just brutal entertainment. They were political tools. Emperors used them to curry favor with the masses, a strategy summed up by the phrase panem et circenses, bread and circuses. Give the people food and entertainment, and they'll forget about their grievances. It's a tactic that echoes through the ages, from Roman forums to modern-day arenas. The gladiatorial games themselves were a microcosm of Roman society, reflecting its values and excesses. Fighters were often slaves or prisoners of war, trained in ludi or schools to become killing machines. Yet successful gladiators achieved a bizarre kind of fame, akin to modern sports stars. They were celebrated, showered with gifts, and sometimes even granted freedom. The arena was a place where the boundaries of social class could blur, however temporarily, and where the thrill of combat captivated all layers of society. Despite the grandeur and spectacle, the Roman Empire was far from stable. The empire's vast size made it difficult to govern, and internal strife was as much a threat as external enemies. Economic troubles, like inflation and over-reliance on slave labor, chipped away at its foundations. By the 3rd century CE, the empire was split into the Western and Eastern Roman empires, a division that might as well have been a divorce settlement in the making. The Western Empire, weighed down by economic woes and relentless barbarian invasions, officially ended in 476 CE, when the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed. The Eastern Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, soldiered on for another 1,000 years, proving that sometimes the sequel lasts longer than the original. So, what's the takeaway from Rome's rise and fall? It's a story of ambition and overreach, of innovation and excess. Rome soared to heights of power unmatched, only to come crashing down under its own weight. Its emperors were as flawed as they were fascinating, and its achievements as monumental as its failures. Yet, through the chaos, Rome left a legacy that echoes through time. Its roads, laws, and architecture laid the groundwork for future civilizations, proving that even when empires fall, their impact lingers like a ghost in the annals of history. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the tapestry of human history, exploring the lessons and legacies of civilizations past. Our journey through time is far from over, so keep your sandals strapped on and your scrolls open. There's plenty more to discover in the epic saga of our shared past. And so, as the echoes of Rome's grandeur slowly fade into the static of history, we're left with one burning question. What in the world do these ancient civilizations have to do with us today? Well, buckle up, because the legacies of these long-gone empires are more alive than you might think. Let's start with governance. The Greeks and Romans weren't just dabbling in politics. They were laying the bricks for modern democracy and republicanism. Athens' experiment with democracy, flawed and exclusionary as it was, planted seeds that would eventually sprout into our current political systems. The idea of citizens having a voice, however small, was a radical notion back then. And don't forget Rome's Republic, which, despite its eventual demise, provided a blueprint for checks and balances that modern governments still grapple with today. Sure, the Roman Senate was often a carnival of corruption, but the concept of representative governance found new life centuries later in the halls of Washington, Paris, and beyond. Turning to architecture, it's hard to overstate how much we owe to these ancient architects. The pyramids of Egypt, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and the Roman aqueducts weren't just feats of engineering. They were symbols of the power and ingenuity of human ambition. Egyptian pyramids, those limestone behemoths, were essentially the world's first skyscrapers, proving that if you want to touch the heavens, you better start stacking some serious stones. Meanwhile, Roman roads, aqueducts, and public baths weren't just about getting from point A to point B. They were about creating an interconnected world where commerce and culture could flourish. Today, every time you flush a toilet or drive on a highway, you're giving a nod to Roman engineering. And then there's culture. The stories and myths from these ancient worlds have seeped into our collective consciousness, shaping literature, art, and even everyday language. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the plays of Sophocles, these ancient tales continue to resonate because they touch on timeless human themes: love, power, betrayal, and the quest for immortality. Sure, Gilgamesh might not be topping the Netflix charts, But his search for meaning is something we all grapple with in our own ways. And let's not forget those Roman gladiatorial games. They were in many ways the precursor to modern sports, where we still gather in massive arenas to watch athletes compete for glory. But let's not get too misty-eyed. For all their achievements, these ancient civilizations were also rife with inequality, oppression, and brutality. The grandeur of Athens was built on the backs of slaves, much as the prosperity of Rome rested on the subjugation of conquered peoples. The pyramids, while awe-inspiring, were also the result of a system that demanded immense human labor under harsh conditions. The romanticized image of noble rulers and wise philosophers often glosses over the stark realities of daily life for the average person, who was more likely to be scrabbling for survival than pondering the meaning of existence. So, why does this selective memory persist? Perhaps it's because we humans are natural storytellers, drawn to the grand narratives that simplify and sanitize the messy complexity of history. We prefer our heroes larger than life, our achievements monumental, our failures glossed over. But history is nuanced, a tapestry woven from both triumph and tragedy. The real challenge is to appreciate the legacy of these civilizations while acknowledging the darker threads in their stories. In the end, the enduring appeal of these ancient worlds lies in their duality, their capacity to inspire and caution, to elevate and humble. They remind us of what humanity can achieve when we reach for the stars, and what we risk when we ignore the shadows. The echoes of their voices, carried through the corridors of time, continue to challenge us to build a future worthy of our past. And so, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through history, let's remember that the past is never truly past. It's a living force, shaping our present and guiding our future. So next time you hear the rustle of parchment or the clink of ancient coins, listen closely. You might just hear the whispers of a civilization that's long gone, yet never truly forgotten. There's a certain solace in knowing that while empires may fall and time marches on, the essence of what it means to be human endures. Until our next journey through time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop seeking the stories that make us who we are. The pyramids of Egypt might stand tall and proud, casting their shadows over the desert sands, but ancient history wasn't all about grand monuments and mystical pharaohs. It was more about the nitty-gritty of farming and food production, the not-so-romantic foundation of civilizations like Egypt and Mesopotamia. Let's dig into the dirt and muck of what really kept these ancient societies thriving, or sometimes failing, when the gods of agriculture weren't feeling too generous. Ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the two powerhouses of early civilization, were basically the overachievers of the ancient world's agriculture class. They didn't just pass, they set the curve. The Nile was Egypt's secret weapon, not just a pretty river for sunset cruises. Every year, it flooded with such regularity that you could set your sundial to it. This annual inundation deposited rich, fertile silt across the land, turning it into a breadbasket that could feed an empire. The Egyptians were growing emmer wheat and barley, a staple combo that would make any ancient baker swoon, alongside flax, which was spun into linen, and papyrus, their version of a notepad. They were agricultural whizzes, producing enough grain to fill massive granaries and feed a population that ballooned to over 2 million by the New Kingdom period, around 1550 BCE. Meanwhile, over in Mesopotamia, they had their own watery benefactor, the Tigris and Euphrates. These rivers didn't flood as predictably as the Nile, which kept things exciting, if by exciting you mean potentially catastrophic. The Mesopotamians were masters of irrigation, building canals and dikes that were essentially their version of an ancient insurance policy against nature's whims. They cultivated wheat and barley, much like their Egyptian counterparts, but they also threw in some chickpeas, lentils, and dates for good measure. By 2000 BCE, the region had enough surplus food to support not just farmers, but also a class of scribes, priests, and warriors, allowing cities like Babylon to grow into bustling urban centers with populations hitting the tens of thousands. But let's not get too carried away with this utopian image of ancient farmers frolicking through sunlit fields. The reality was a grind that would make today's desk job look like a vacation. Tilling the land meant back-breaking labor, with wooden plows that weren't exactly ergonomic. This was no 9-to-5 gig. It was a dawn-to-dusk ordeal. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, along comes a drought or a particularly nasty flood to wipe out your year's hard work. There's nothing like Mother Nature to remind you who's boss. Yet, despite these challenges, there's a reason we remember these ancient societies. They harnessed the power of their environments with a mix of ingenuity, sweat, and a little bit of luck, or divine favor if you ask their priests. They set the foundations for what would become complex societies, with all the trappings of urban life that we, in some form or another, still live with today. The agricultural prowess of Egypt and Mesopotamia was more than just a ticket to survival. It was the launch pad for everything else that followed: riding, laws, religion, art. All that good stuff needs a stable food supply, after all. They navigated the whims of rivers, and weather with a resilience that's as impressive as any pyramid or ziggurat. So, while it's easy to get swept up in the grandeur of ancient architecture, it's the simple grains of wheat and barley that truly tell the story of their success. In the end, the farmers of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia weren't just toiling away in obscurity. They were the backbone of civilizations that would leave a mark on history, one crop yield at a time. Their successes and failures are reminders that even the mightiest empires start with something as humble as a seed in the ground. So, while the ancient farmers of Egypt and Mesopotamia were busy planting the seeds of civilization, their neighbors across the Mediterranean were cooking up something just as revolutionary: the blueprints for a vast economic empire. Let's set sail to ancient Rome and Greece, where commerce was the name of the game and money wasn't just something you buried in the backyard for a rainy day. Rome and Greece were the OG influencers of the ancient world, and I'm not talking about toga fashion tips. Their economic systems were the backbone of their power, and boy, was it a tangled web of trade routes, taxes, and the kind of financial practices that make modern banking look like child's play. Picture Rome, the powerhouse of antiquity, with its intricate network of roads, over 50,000 miles of them stretching out like a spider's web across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. These roads weren't just for marching legions. They were the arteries of commerce, carrying everything from Spanish olive oil to Egyptian grain. Now, let's talk money. Roman coins were a real piece of work, literally. Made from precious metals like gold, silver, and bronze, they were the universal language of trade. The denarius, a silver coin, was the currency of the Roman Empire, roughly equivalent to a day's wages for a laborer. Imagine explaining that to your boss today. "I'll take my pay in denarii, thank you very much." Meanwhile, over in Athens, the economy was buzzing with its own unique flair. The Athenian drachma was the coin of the realm, and it was as famous as the Parthenon. The value that could buy you a loaf of bread and a glass of wine, a solid lunch by any standard, the drachma was the lifeblood of the Athenian marketplace, or agora. This was the place where philosophers like Socrates would wander about, possibly pondering the best price for fresh fish. But let's not romanticize the ancients too much. Their financial systems were hardly idyllic. Taxation was a necessary evil, and the Romans mastered the art of extracting cash with all the subtlety of a marching legion. They had taxes for land, slaves, inheritance. You name it, they taxed it. And let's not forget the portoria, those pesky customs duties that made sure even goods had to pay their way into the empire. It's like a toll booth on steroids. The Greeks weren't far behind. They had their own methods of fleecing the populace, with taxes that would make your head spin. The eisphora was a wartime tax, basically a patriotic nudge to cough up some cash for the military. And if you thought tax evasion was a modern invention, think again. Athenians were already masters of the craft, dodging taxes with a cunning that would make any modern-day accountant proud. Trade was the lifeblood of these civilizations, and the routes were as complex as a soap opera plot. The Silk Road, while more famous for its later role in connecting China to the West, had its early iterations during this time, with caravans traversing deserts and mountains, laden with silk, spices, and other exotic goods. The Mediterranean Sea was their highway, bustling with ships darting between ports like bees in a hive, carrying everything from Tyrian purple dye to Roman garo, a fermented fish sauce that was apparently all the rage. Talk about a condiment with a kick. The Roman and Greek economies weren't just about buying and selling. They were about power and influence. Control the trade routes, and you control the empire. The Romans knew this all too well, expanding their roads and ports to solidify their grip on the Mediterranean. And the Greeks, with their city-states like Athens and Corinth, were no slouches either, leveraging their naval prowess to dominate the Aegean Sea. But with great power comes great bureaucracy, and the ancients were pioneers in red tape. The complexity of their systems would give any modern government a run for its money. Roman tax collectors, or publicani, were infamous for their efficiency and their greed. They were the ultimate middlemen, contracted by the state to rake in the cash, often skimming a little off the top for themselves. It was a system that made today's IRS look like a charity. So, why does any of this matter? Because the economic systems of Rome and Greece set the stage for what we consider modern economics. They were the first to grapple with the challenges of managing vast empires, and their innovations in trade, taxation, and finance are the ancestors of today's global markets. The Romans and Greeks weren't just trading goods, they were trading ideas, creating a legacy that would influence economies for millennia. In the end, the story of ancient Rome and Greece isn't just about emperors and philosophers. It's about the merchants, the tax collectors, the traders who formed the backbone of these mighty civilizations. They were the unsung heroes of the ancient world, navigating the complexities of an economy that was as grand as it was flawed. And whether they were haggling in the agora or counting coins in a Roman villa, they were living proof that money makes the world go round. And sometimes a little crazy too. So, the next time you find yourself grumbling about taxes or balancing your budget, spare a thought for the ancients. They were navigating the same financial currents we are today, albeit with fewer spreadsheets and more togas. And as we continue to explore their world, we'll uncover even more stories of economic ingenuity, political maneuvering, and yes, a fair share of chaos. Stay tuned, because the past is full of surprises. We've only just begun to scratch the surface. While we've been high-fiving ancient merchants and tax collectors for their economic acrobatics, let's pivot to the real political circus acts of history, ancient empires. Brace yourself, because we're diving into the Persian and Roman empires, where rulers weren't just sitting on thrones, they were riding the roller coaster of power, with all the ups, downs, and sudden twists that make for a good history lesson. The Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BCE, wasn't just an empire, it was the empire. Stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, it was like the ancient version of a multinational corporation. Cyrus, well, he knew that in the game of thrones, you win by being a little more flexible than your average dictator. He didn't just conquer, he administered with a savvy that would make today's CEOs envious. His policy of tolerance, allowing local customs and religions to flourish, was a masterstroke in empire building. But of course, you can't get by on charm alone. He enforced his rule with the help of the Immortals, an elite force of 10,000 soldiers who were about as mortal as their name suggests when it came to battle. After Cyrus, the Persian Empire had its share of headline-grabbing rulers. Take Darius I, for instance, who came to power in 522 BCE. Darius wasn't content with the status quo. He was the ultimate empire tinkerer. He divided the empire into satrapies, think of them as ancient federal states, and appointed satraps, or governors, to keep things in check. It was bureaucracy on steroids, complete with a royal road that stretched over 500 miles, allowing messages to be delivered in just a week. That's faster than some modern postal services, which is both impressive and slightly embarrassing for us today. But let's not forget Xerxes I, the guy you might remember from that movie with all the dramatic slow-motion battle scenes. His reign, beginning in 486 BCE, was marked by the famous Greco-Persian Wars. Ah, the Greeks, always ready to throw a wrench in the works. Xerxes' grand invasion of Greece in 480 BCE, including the infamous Battle of Thermopylae, was a spectacle of epic proportions. Despite the cinematic appeal, things didn't go exactly as planned for Xerxes. His forces were eventually defeated, and he returned home with a dented ego and a lighter treasury. Now, if you think the Persian Empire was a political soap opera, wait until we get to Rome. The Romans took drama to a whole new level. The Republic, which kicked off around 509 BCE, was a playground for power-hungry politicians, with consuls, senators, and tribunes all vying for a slice of the political pie. But the real fireworks started with the transition to the Roman Empire. Enter Julius Caesar, the man, the myth, the toga-clad legend. Caesar wasn't just content with being a part of the political machine, he wanted to be the machine. His crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BCE wasn't just a geographical move, it was a political mic drop. Declaring war on the Roman Senate led to a civil war that concluded with Caesar as the dictator for life. Though, spoiler alert, that life was cut tragically short on the Ides of March, 44 BCE, when a group of senators stabbed him 23 times. Talk about a hostile takeover. But Caesar's assassination didn't exactly bring peace and stability to Rome. Instead, it paved the way for his grandnephew, Octavian, later known as Augustus. In 27 BCE, Augustus declared himself the first emperor of Rome, effectively ending the Republic. Augustus was no slouch. He knew the value of image and propaganda. He established the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and prosperity that lasted over 2 centuries. Under his rule, Rome flourished, with a population swelling to over 1 million. He knew how to play the political game, balancing power with a dose of diplomacy that would make even the most seasoned spin doctor nod in approval. The imperial line was a mixed bag of rulers who ranged from the competent to the downright calamitous. Take Caligula, for instance, who ruled from 37 to 41 CE. Known for his eccentricities, like appointing his horse as a priest, Caligula's reign was a masterclass in how not to rule an empire. Then there was Nero, who famously fiddled while Rome burned, though historians now believe he was more of a scapegoat than a pyromaniac. His real crime was mismanagement, eventually leading to his downfall in 68 CE. So, what can we learn from these tales of power and politics? For one, the myth of the great leader is often just that, a myth. These rulers were as flawed and fallible as any, their legacies a mix of triumphs and tragedies. While the stories of their conquests and downfalls are tantalizing, the reality was often more complex. Behind the scenes, there were power struggles, political machinations, and economic pressures that shaped their reigns. As we continue this journey through the corridors of ancient power, remember, history isn't just about the grand narratives of emperors and kings. It's about the messy, intricate web of decisions, alliances, and betrayals that define human nature, both then and now. So, buckle up, because the past is far from finished with us. The next chapter promises even more intrigue and revelations as we delve deeper into the ancient world. Stay tuned, and let's see what other surprises history has in store. As we dive deeper into the lives of ancient people, let's pull back the velvet curtains of history to reveal the gritty realities lurking behind the grandeur of empires and the allure of ancient splendor. Sure, palaces and pyramids make for great postcards, but what was life really like for the everyday Joe? Or should I say, everyday Julius? For starters, the social hierarchies of ancient civilizations were as rigid as a pharaoh's poker face. Picture a pyramid, not unlike those in Giza, only this one represents society. At the top, you've got your rulers, pharaohs, emperors, kings, living large and often lavishly, with all the perks that absolute power provides. These guys were the ancient influencers, complete with entourages and a flair for dictating trends, from divine decrees to the latest in tunic fashion. But let's talk numbers, because the devil's in the details, or in this case, the census. Ancient Egypt, around the time of the New Kingdom, circa 1550-1070 BCE, boasted a population of over 2 million people. The majority were peasants, and while that word might conjure up images of dirty faces and hay bales, these folks were vital cogs in the machine, tending the fields and ensuring that grain flowed as freely as gossip at a royal court. Gender roles were another cornerstone of ancient societies, with rules stricter than a Roman senator's toga. In Egypt, women had more rights than in many contemporary cultures. They could own property, initiate divorce, and engage in business. Cleopatra might have been the poster girl for Egyptian female power, but she was the exception, not the rule. Most women were expected to manage households and produce heirs, preferably male ones, because patriarchy was the ancient world's favorite pastime. Over in Rome, the paterfamilias reigned supreme. This title wasn't just a neat nickname. It was the legal and moral authority over the family, with the power to arrange marriages, manage finances, and even sell family members into slavery if things got really dicey. Talk about family dynamics with a side of drama. On the topic of slavery, let's debunk the myth of the kindly Roman slave owner. Slavery was the backbone of both the Roman and Greek economies, with slaves making up as much as 30% of the population in Rome during the height of the empire. These weren't just household servants. They were laborers, teachers, and even gladiators. And those gladiators, yeah, they weren't exactly signing up for a sports scholarship. They were often prisoners of war or condemned criminals, fighting for their lives and maybe, just maybe, a shot at freedom. The urban-rural divide was as stark as night and day. City dwellers in places like Athens or Rome lived in bustling metropolises, complete with public baths, theatres, and markets that would make a modern-day mall feel like a ghost town. But don't let the romantic image of ancient cities fool you. Living conditions could be rough. The average Roman insulae, or apartment building, was a fire hazard waiting to happen, with wooden structures stacked taller than your average ego. The bottom floors were prime real estate, while the upper levels were cramped, dark, and prone to collapsing faster than a Roman politician's promises. Out in the countryside, life was simpler, but not necessarily easier. Rural folks were primarily farmers, and their daily grind made today's 9-to-5 look like a nap. If you were lucky, you owned your plot of land and could eke out a living, but tenant farmers often found themselves at the mercy of wealthy landowners. Agricultural yields depended heavily on the whims of the weather gods, and a bad season could spell disaster faster than you could say crop failure. Class distinctions were as clear as the lines on a scribe's papyrus. In Rome, the patricians, those born into noble families, were at the top, while plebeians, the commoners, formed the broader base of society. The struggle between these classes was the stuff of legend, literally. The conflict of the orders, a political struggle between these groups, eventually led to greater rights for the plebeians. But let's not get too carried away with tales of justice. The rich still had the upper hand, often flaunting their wealth and influence like a peacock with a new tail. Speaking of wealth, let's pop the bubble of ancient luxury. Sure, emperors and pharaohs lived in palatial splendor, but the average citizen's idea of luxury was a roof that didn't leak and a meal that wasn't just barley porridge. And while mosaics and murals might depict lavish feasts, the reality for most was a diet of bread, olives, and maybe a bit of cheese if times were good. Meat was a rarity, more likely to appear on your plate if you were a guest at a wealthy patron's banquet than in your own humble kitchen. But let's not forget the allure of the city. Urban life offered opportunities that were as numerous as the gods in the Roman pantheon. Theaters hosted comedies and tragedies that were the Netflix of their day, while the Agora in Athens was the birthplace of democracy and debate. Here, philosophers and politicians rubbed shoulders with merchants and craftsmen, exchanging ideas and goods in equal measure. So, let's raise a goblet to the ordinary folks of ancient civilizations. They might not have been building pyramids or plotting naval invasions, but they were the heartbeat of their societies. Their struggles and triumphs, though often overshadowed by the grand narratives of emperors and kings, are a testament to human resilience and ingenuity. As we leave the sun-baked fields and crowded streets of the ancient world behind, remember that history is more than just the tales of great leaders and epic battles. It's the story of everyday people, living their lives in the shadows of giants, contributing to the tapestry of human history in ways both grand and humble. And as we prepare to uncover more layers of this ancient world, stay tuned for more revelations about the people and places that shaped our past. Because in history, as in life, there's always more than meets the eye. As we prepare to dive into the long shadows left by ancient civilizations, let's pause for a second. Have you ever marveled at how the ancients, with their sandals and sundials, could have any lasting impact on our smartphone-driven lives? Well, prepare to be amazed, because their contributions are woven into the very fabric of our existence, often with a twist of irony that would make even the most stoic philosopher crack a smile. Let's kick things off with technology. Ancient Rome, for instance, wasn't just about gladiators and grandiose speeches. It was also about engineering feats that would make modern architects nod in approval. The Roman aqueducts, those grand stone structures that snaked across the landscape, were more than just a pretty backdrop for historical dramas. These marvels could transport water over 50 miles, ensuring that Rome's bustling population could sip, soak, and stay hydrated without resorting to the Tiber's dubious offerings. Imagine a world without indoor plumbing, No thanks. But the Romans weren't the only ones with their eyes on the engineering prize. The Greeks gave us the Antikythera mechanism, a bronze contraption that dates back to around 100 BCE and is often dubbed the world's first analog computer. This intricate device could predict astronomical positions and eclipses years in advance. It's like ancient Netflix, but instead of streaming the latest drama, it's giving you the cosmic lineup. And what about the Archimedes screw? This clever device was used for lifting water from low-lying areas to higher ground, a technology still in use today. Talk about an ancient invention with legs. Moving from the physical to the philosophical, we find ourselves in the land of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These guys weren't just sitting around in togas pontificating for fun. They were laying the groundwork for Western philosophy, ethics, and even political theory. Democracy, that messy yet beautiful experiment, was born in the Agora of Athens, where every free male citizen could have his say. Of course, the definition of citizen was about as inclusive as a country club membership list, but the idea was revolutionary, and it planted seeds that would eventually grow into the democratic systems we know today. In the realm of governance, let's give a nod to the ancient Persians. Cyrus the Great and his successors ran an empire that put today's multinational corporations to shame. Their system of satrapies, or provinces, each governed by a satrap, ensured efficient administration across a sprawling territory. This approach was all about delegation before it was cool, allowing local customs to flourish while maintaining central control. The irony. Modern governments could learn a thing or two about flexibility and tolerance from these ancient bureaucrats. And speaking of governance, how about those Roman laws? The 12 tables, etched in stone around 450 BCE, were the early version of a legal code, providing transparency and consistency in legal matters. It was a far cry from today's legal tomes that could double as doorstops, but the spirit of equality before the law started here. Sure, it wasn't perfect. Show me a legal system that is. But it was a start. Now, let's dig into the delicious irony of ancient medicine. While the Egyptians were busy mummifying pharaohs with a combination of herbs and a sprinkle of superstition, they were also pioneering medical practices that laid the groundwork for modern medicine. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating back to around 1600 BCE, reads like an ancient ER script, detailing surgical procedures and treatments for various ailments. It's like Gray's Anatomy, but with more linen bandages and fewer love triangles. But let's not get carried away romanticizing the ancients as the original trailblazers. Some of their practices, while well-intentioned, were just plain bizarre. The Romans believed in the healing power of gladiator blood, often mixing it into potions as a cure-all. File that under things that didn't age well. Meanwhile, the Greeks thought that hysteria in women was due to a wandering womb. No wonder they had no shortage of philosophers. They were probably trying to make sense of the medical advice of the day. As we wrap up this historical ride, it's clear that the legacies of ancient civilizations are more than dusty relics. From aqueducts to algorithms, these innovations and ideas continue to shape our world in ways that are both profound and unexpectedly humorous. So next time you're stuck in traffic on a modern highway, spare a thought for the Roman roads that paved the way, literally and figuratively, for the infrastructure we rely on today. In the grand tapestry of history, ancient civilizations are the threads that hold the whole thing together, even if some of those threads are a bit frayed around the edges. Their contributions remind us that innovation and progress are timeless pursuits, driven by human curiosity and a dash of ambition. And while we might chuckle at their quirks and misconceptions, we owe them a debt of gratitude for laying the bedrock of our modern world. So, as you settle into the comfort of your 21st century conveniences, remember that the ancients were the original tinkerers, dreamers, and thinkers, living proof that while the specifics may change, the essence of human endeavor remains the same. They reached for the stars with nothing more than a few tools, a lot of grit, and an imagination that knew no bounds. And perhaps that's the most enduring legacy of all. Before TikTok, before telephones, and long before anyone thought about arguing over daylight saving time, there was Mesopotamia, the OG of civilizations. Picture a land nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the first urban planners were busy laying out the blueprint for modern society. And no, They weren't drawing up plans for artisanal coffee shops or condos with rooftop pools. Instead, they were grappling with how to feed growing populations, manage scarce water resources, and invent riding without a single hashtag in sight. Let's talk urban planning in Mesopotamia. These folks were building cities like Uruk and which were the ancient world's equivalent of New York and L.A., but without the traffic jams or the Broadway shows, of course. Uruk, for instance, was a bustling metropolis by 3200 BC, boasting a population of about 40,000. That's like packing Madison Square Garden to the brim with people who had never even heard of electricity. And the challenge, making sure these folks didn't end up swimming every time the rivers decided to throw a tantrum, which was often. To tackle this, Mesopotamians got creative. They dug canals and built levees, turning themselves into early civil engineers with a penchant for mud, bricks, and ingenuity. Yet while they were managing water flow, they inadvertently set the stage for one of humanity's longest-running dramas, resource management. Sound familiar? Today, we're still trying to figure out how to use our resources wisely, and Mesopotamians were the original cast of this never-ending play. Meanwhile, in the political arena, Mesopotamia was like a reality TV show with a rotating cast of city-states vying for power. Each city had its own king, who was often seen as a middleman between humans and the capricious gods. These rulers were not just about pomp and circumstance. They had real responsibilities, including making sure the gods were happy, which, let's be honest, probably involved more sacrifices than your average office potluck. The invention of riding around 3200 BC was probably Mesopotamia's greatest hit. We're talking cuneiform, a system that involved wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets. It wasn't exactly Shakespeare, but it got the job done. This innovation allowed them to keep records, which was revolutionary for trade and governance. You see, without writing, you'd have to rely on oral tradition, and we all know how well that works after a few pints at the local tavern. Cuneiform scribes were the rock stars of their time, wielding styluses instead of guitars. The economic implications were enormous. Imagine trying to trade a shipment of grain without a receipt or contract. Utter chaos. Thanks to writing, they could keep track of transactions, laws, and even epic tales, like the story of Gilgamesh, which is basically the world's first buddy road trip saga. But back to the nitty-gritty of daily life. Mesopotamia's society had its fair share of practical challenges. The rivers were both a blessing and a curse, providing fertile soil, but also flooding like an overzealous sprinkler system. The Mesopotamians built an intricate network of irrigation to tame these waters, which was no small feat. This required a level of coordination and cooperation that would make modern city planners weep with envy. Despite their best efforts, they faced resource management issues that feel eerily contemporary. As populations grew, so did the demand for resources, leading to conflicts over land and water, a theme that remains depressingly relevant today. City-states often clashed, and while these skirmishes lacked the firepower of modern warfare, they were just as brutal. So, what's the takeaway here? Mesopotamia was a land of firsts, a place where people were figuring out the basics of running a society. Urban planning, government, and writing all emerged from this fertile crescent. These ancient trailblazers laid the groundwork for everything that followed, showing us that even 5,000 years ago, people were trying to solve the same problems we grapple with today. And while the details have changed, the core issues remain, a testament to the timeless challenges of civilization. Who knew that beneath the dust of history, there was so much that resonates with the present? Now, let's shift gears from Mesopotamia's urban sprawl to the land of pharaohs, hieroglyphics, and enough sand to make a beach resort cringe. Ancient Egypt, folks. A civilization that knew how to make a statement with colossal stone pyramids. You've seen them in postcards, Instagram shots, and maybe even a few questionable sci-fi flicks. But what you might not know is the economic gymnastics needed to pull off such architectural marvels. First up, let's tackle the elephant in the room. The pyramids weren't built by slaves in loincloths whipped into submission by tyrannical overseers. Nope, that's a Hollywood myth older than the pyramids themselves. In reality, these massive structures were the work of a skilled labor force, likely comprising seasonal workers who were more akin to a well-coordinated construction crew than shackled captives. These workers were organized into teams of about 20, 000 to 30, 000 individuals, a figure that might surprise anyone picturing a ragtag assembly of coerced labor. And let's not forget the logistics. Hauling multi-ton limestone blocks isn't something you just wing. The Egyptians had a system, folks, ramps, sledges, and a lot of elbow grease. Picture this: workers dragging stones across the desert, aided by a bit of water to reduce friction. It's like the ancient world's version of a slip-and slide, only with less fun and more sweat. The stones needed for the Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, were sourced from quarries nearby, such as Tura, and transported over distances that would make your daily commute seem like a walk in the park. Now, about the cost. Building these pyramids wasn't just a matter of slapping some rocks together. We're talking about a massive economic undertaking. The construction of the Great Pyramid is estimated to have used up around 5 million tons of limestone, 8,000 tons of granite, and 500,000 tons of mortar. That's a lot of stone and a serious hit to the royal treasury. How did they pay for all this? Taxes, my friends. The ancient Egyptian economy was a complex system where labor could be taxed, and food and goods were redistributed from the surplus of the Nile's fertile banks. That's right, those rich annual floods weren't just for growing papyrus. They were funding some of history's greatest achievements. Social hierarchy played a huge role here. At the top, you had the pharaoh, who was more than just a ruler. He was a living god, the embodiment of divine order on earth. This wasn't just a cushy title. It meant the pharaoh had the ultimate responsibility for maintaining the cosmic balance. Below him were the nobles, priests, and officials who helped manage the state's resources. Think of them as the original bureaucrats, minus the soul-crushing paperwork and office coffee breaks. Meanwhile, everyday Egyptians, farmers, craftsmen, and laborers, had roles that might surprise you. Far from being mere cogs in the machine, they were vital to the economy. Thanks to the Nile's predictable flooding, they enjoyed a fairly reliable agricultural cycle, which allowed them to contribute labor during the off-season. It was a win-win. The state got its pyramids, and the workers got food, shelter, and the occasional beer. Yes, beer. It wasn't just for happy hour. It was a staple part of the Egyptian diet, a liquid carbohydrate as essential as bread. Economically speaking, Egypt was a well-oiled machine. The redistribution of resources was key. Surplus grain from bumper crops was stored in granaries and doled out to workers as payment. This wasn't just charity. It was a savvy way to ensure social stability and keep everyone invested in the state's success. After all, nobody wants to riot on an empty stomach. So, where does this leave us? Ancient Egypt wasn't a land of perpetual whip-cracking tyranny. It was a sophisticated society that balanced labor, resources, and divine mandate to pull off some of the most jaw-dropping feats of engineering the world has ever seen. And while the pyramids stand as a testament to human ingenuity, they're also a reminder that great achievements often require great collaboration. From the top of the social pyramid to the bottom, everyone had a role to play. It's a bit like a rock concert. Sure, the pharaoh might be the headliner, but without the roadies, it's just a guy in a fancy hat. As we ponder these ancient economic marvels, let's leave some room for the next act. We've only scratched the surface of Egypt's intricacies, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of history that connect us to these fascinating times. Which brings us to ancient Greece, where the drama of human governance gets a starring role. We're talking about Athens around 508 BC, the birthplace of democracy, or at least what they called democracy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't all toga parties and philosophical debates in the sun-drenched agora. This was a time of intense political intrigue, where power was as much about who you knew as it was about who you were. Let's start with a little context. Athens wasn't always the democratic wonderland it's often painted as. Before democracy, Athens was the playground of tyrants, and not the kind you might have met at family reunions. These guys were more about absolute power than awkward holiday dinners. But by 508 BC, the political landscape was shifting. Enter Cleisthenes, a reformer who decided that maybe it was time for a change. Picture him as the ancient Steve Jobs of governance, looking to revolutionize the system with a new kind of political operating system. Cleisthenes' grand vision was to give power to the people, or at least a select group of people. The thing is, this democracy came with a few strings attached. Kind of like when you sign up for a free trial and realize you've just subscribed to a year of unwanted newsletters. Only male citizens over the age of 18 could participate, and you had to be freeborn Athenian. Sorry, women, slaves, and foreigners, your invites got lost in the mail. Despite these limitations, Cleisthenes' reforms were groundbreaking for the time. He reorganized the population into 10 tribes, each with representatives in the new council of 500. Think of it as the world's most exclusive club where membership is determined by lottery. Imagine if Congress was filled with people randomly selected from your local coffee shop. It was democracy, but with a twist of fate instead of votes. Now, this council had a hand in everything from military matters to religious festivals. But the real magic happened in the assembly, where citizens gathered to debate and vote on key issues. It's like a town hall meeting on steroids, with the added bonus of no remote working. And these debates weren't just polite discussions over tea. They were passionate, often heated, and sometimes involved more drama than a reality TV reunion episode. Here's a fun fact. The word idiot originally came from the Greek idios, which referred to someone who didn't participate in public life. So, the next time you hear someone ranting about politics on social media, remember, they're technically not being an idiot by ancient Greek standards. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this early democracy. The exclusion of women, slaves, and non-citizens wasn't just a footnote. It was a pretty hefty asterisk on the whole democratic ideal. As much as we like to romanticize Athens as the cradle of democracy, it was more like a crib with a missing leg. This wasn't everyone's democracy. It was a democracy for about 30,000 out of the city's 250,000 people. Not exactly a landslide of inclusivity. Yet this system did set a precedent. It showed that governance could be more than a monarchy's whim. It could be a collective effort, even if it was limited. The idea was revolutionary, and over time it evolved. You could say Athens planted the seed, even if they forgot to water it properly. Economically, this democratic experiment had a few tricks up its sleeve. By involving citizens in decision-making, Athens created a vested interest in public affairs, which helped stabilize and grow its economy. The state's coffers were filled by taxes on trade and the silver mines at Laurium, ensuring there was money to fund public works, and of course, the navy, because nothing says democracy like a fleet of triremes ready to defend your city-state. Speaking of the navy, Athens' maritime prowess wasn't just a happy accident. It was a calculated move to protect and expand its trade interests. With control over the Aegean Sea, Athens could ensure that its trade routes were as secure as a billionaire's bank account. And let's not forget the Delian League, an alliance ostensibly formed to fend off the Persians, but practically used as an Athenian empire-building tool. Athens was like the friend who borrows your car and then expects you to pay for gas. Culturally, this period was a hotbed of intellectual and artistic activity. Philosophers like Socrates wandered the streets, questioning everything from the nature of justice to why on earth anyone would wear socks with sandals. Theatrical performances thrived, with tragedies and comedies reflecting societal values and poking fun at political figures. It's like Saturday Night Live, but with more togas and fewer commercial breaks. So, where does this leave us? Ancient Greece was a land of contradictions, a society that sparked the idea of democracy, but wrapped it in layers of exclusivity. It was a place where political intrigue and power struggles were as common as olive trees, yet it dared to imagine a different way of governance. And while the Athenian system was far from perfect, its legacy is undeniable. As we navigate the complexities of modern democracy, it's worth remembering that even the most revolutionary ideas have humble, flawed beginnings. Athens showed us that democracy is a journey, not a destination, an ongoing experiment that continues to evolve. So, the next time you find yourself frustrated with the state of politics, just think, at least you're not Cleisthenes trying to herd cats in the form of opinionated Athenians. Stay tuned as we continue this historical escapade, diving further into the world of ancient politics and beyond, where the past has more to say about our present than we might think. Speaking of navigating complexities, let's hop across the Mediterranean to ancient Rome, circa 117 AD, a time when the empire was flexing its muscles and showing off its toga. At its peak under Emperor Trajan, Rome wasn't just a city. It was an empire sprawling over 5 million square kilometers, from the rain-soaked hills of Britannia to the sun-drenched sands of Egypt. But don't let those marble statues fool you. Maintaining this colossal empire was like trying to herd cats across a continent. First, let's talk military might. The Roman legions were the backbone of the empire, and boy, did they know how to make an entrance. Picture legions marching in perfect formation, shields glinting in the sun, the ground shaking under the synchronized stamp of thousands of sandals. These guys were the original stormtroopers, minus the questionable aim. Each legion consisted of about 5,000 soldiers, and with around 30 legions at Rome's peak, that's a whopping 150,000 battle-hardened troops ready to enforce the Pax Romana, the Roman peace that was, ironically, anything but peaceful. These soldiers weren't just weekend warriors. They were professional, well-trained, and crucially well-paid. A legionary's annual salary was about 900 sesterces, roughly the price of a mid-range Roman horse or a year's supply of garum, that delightful fermented fish, sauce they couldn't get enough of. And here's the kicker. Unlike in many other armies, Roman soldiers were in it for the long haul. A 20-year service was the norm, and retirement came with a bonus of land or a hefty cash payout. It wasn't just a career. It was job security with a sword. Now, maintaining this military machine was like running a multinational corporation, and the costs were astronomical. The Roman Empire's military budget was estimated to be about half of its total expenditures. Imagine a modern country spending half its GDP on defense. It's no wonder they had to impose taxes on everything from land to urine. Yes, you heard that right. The Vespasian tax, named after Emperor Vespasian, was levied on public urinals, proving that when it came to revenue, Rome didn't waste a drop. But economics is only part of the story. The social costs of maintaining such a vast empire were equally staggering. The Romans were experts at cultural assimilation, but it was less about cumbere and more about, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Conquered peoples were offered a carrot and stick deal. Adopt Roman customs, pay your taxes, and you might just get to keep your local leaders and some semblance of autonomy. Resist, and you'd be on the wrong end of a Roman sword faster than you could say, Caesarean section. Yet, this wasn't just about brute force. Rome's genius lay in its ability to weave different cultures into the fabric of the empire. The Romans were like cultural magpies, borrowing the best bits of other cultures and making them Roman. Greek philosophy. Let's slap a toga on Socrates. Egyptian gods. Meet your new Roman counterparts. It was cultural fusion before fusion cuisine was even a thing. However, as much as we love to romanticize the efficiency of Roman roads and aqueducts, let's not gloss over the less glamorous side. Sure, the Romans built roads that stretched over 400,000 kilometers, but those weren't just for leisurely chariot rides or family vacations to Capri. They were military highways designed for rapid troop movement, not scenic detours. And those aqueducts. Ingenious, yes, but also a testament to the sheer necessity of supplying a burgeoning urban population with water, a population that, at its peak, included around 1 million people in Rome alone. Such urban centers were microcosms of the empire's complexity. They were bustling hubs of trade, culture, and political intrigue, but also rife with social tensions. The vast wealth accumulated in the city was a double-edged sword, creating stark divides between the elite patricians and the plebeians, the common folk who were often just a missed harvest away from bread riots. And let's not forget the slaves. An estimated 30% of Rome's population were enslaved people, whose labor was the invisible engine driving the empire's economy. While the elite lounged in their villas, it was these individuals who toiled in the fields, mines, and households, keeping the wheels of empire turning. Entertainment was another Roman specialty, and the Colosseum was the empire's piece de resistance. This architectural wonder could seat around 50,000 spectators, all eager to watch gladiatorial games that were as much about statecraft as spectacle. These games were funded by emperors and politicians as a means of gaining favor with the public, a sort of ancient PR campaign with a healthy dose of blood and sand. The Romans believed in bread and circuses, keep the populace fed and entertained, and they are less likely to question why their taxes are so high. Beneath the grandeur of the Colosseum and the efficiency of Roman engineering lay the harsh realities of empire. The cost of expansion wasn't just financial, it was human. The constant need for new territories to fuel the empire's economy led to endless wars, ensuring a steady supply of slaves and loot, but also perpetuating cycles of violence and instability. And as the empire expanded, so did the complexity of managing it. Provincial governors were often more concerned with lining their own pockets than with good governance, leading to corruption that would make a modern politician blush. So, while the Romans did achieve incredible feats, creating a legal system that influenced centuries of jurisprudence and a legacy of architecture that continues to inspire, they also left behind a trail of contradictions. They were both builders and conquerors, visionaries and oppressors. Their legacy is as enduring as their roads, yet as complex and divided as the empire they once ruled. As we ponder these ancient paradoxes, remember that the allure of Rome is as much about its flaws as its feats. It was an empire built on ambition and maintained through sheer willpower, but it was also one perpetually teetering on the brink of chaos. So, the next time you see a Roman ruin or a marble bust, think about the stories they tell, stories of power, ambition, and the human cost of empire. Stay tuned as we continue this grand tour through history, digging deeper into the mysteries and marvels of ancient times. There's plenty more to uncover, and as always, the past has more to whisper about our present than we might care to admit. As we leave behind the grandeur of ancient Rome's empire, let's fast forward to 476 AD, the year Rome officially decided it was time to start pretending everything was fine. Picture an empire that once stretched from the chilly shores of Britain to the heated sands of Egypt, now reduced to a shadow of its former self, like a global superpower trying to run on dial-up in a broadband world. Rome's decline wasn't a sudden, dramatic crash. It was more like a slow-motion car wreck that everyone saw coming but couldn't quite stop. So, what were the nails in the coffin for this colossal empire that once boasted an army of 500,000 soldiers and a population of about 60 million souls? Spoiler alert, it wasn't just one thing, but a perfect storm of economic, social, and environmental pressures that made sure Rome's fall was more of a tragic opera than a heroic saga. First, let's talk money, or rather, the lack of it. By the 3rd century, Rome's economy was crumbling like a poorly baked loaf of bread. Inflation was rampant, and the silver content in coins had dropped from 90% to a measly 5% by the time Emperor Gallienus was on the throne. Imagine paying for your morning coffee with coins that are worth less than the paper receipt. It wasn't just a currency crisis. It was a full-blown economic meltdown. But wait, there's more. The empire's heavy reliance on slave labor meant that technological innovation was about as welcome as a toga party at a nudist colony. With slaves making up a third of the population, there was little incentive to improve efficiency or productivity. And when the flow of new slaves dried up due to fewer conquests, it was like pulling the rug out from under the Roman economy. Now, add to this cocktail of chaos a dash of political instability. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome had over 20 emperors, most of whom met untimely ends through assassination, battle, or sheer bad luck. The average reign was shorter than a modern political scandal, and with each new emperor came new policies, new taxes, and new headaches for everyone from senators to soldiers. It's no wonder the empire was about as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Socially, Rome was a hot mess of class divides and urban decay. The rich were getting richer, living it up in opulent villas, while the poor were left to scramble for bread and circuses. The grain dole, Rome's ancient welfare system, kept the urban masses fed, but it was a band-aid on a gaping wound. The divide between the haves and have-nots was as wide as the empire itself, and it didn't take a soothsayer to predict that social unrest was brewing. As if that wasn't enough, Mother Nature decided to throw her 2 cents in with a series of plagues and famines that swept through the empire like a bad Yelp review. The Antonine Plague in 165 AD and the Cyprian Plague a century later decimated the population, killing millions and leaving a labor shortage that couldn't be filled by wishful thinking alone. It was like the universe was telling Rome to take a seat and rethink its life choices. By the time 476 AD rolled around, Rome was a sitting duck. The Western Empire was besieged by barbarian tribes who saw the writing on the wall and decided it was time for a hostile takeover. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 AD, followed by the Vandals in 455 AD, proving that Rome's invincible reputation was more of a historical footnote than a present reality. Finally, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a name that sounds like the punchline to a bad joke, was deposed by the Germanic king Odoacer, and Rome officially signed off as the world's biggest cautionary tale. So, what can modern societies learn from the fall of Rome, other than the fact that naming your kid Romulus Augustulus is a surefire way to ensure they end up in therapy? First, economic resilience is key. Relying too heavily on one form of labor or resource is like building a house of cards in a hurricane. Diversification isn't just for investment portfolios, it's a survival tactic. Second, political stability matters. Having more emperors than a Las Vegas Elvis impersonator convention is a recipe for disaster. Continuity and consistent policies are the bedrock of a functioning state. And finally, social cohesion is critical. When the gap between the rich and poor becomes a chasm, social unrest is sure to follow. Bread and circuses might placate the masses for a time, but real, sustainable solutions require addressing the root causes of inequality. And let's not forget the environmental factor. Plagues and famines might seem like ancient history, but climate change and pandemics are very much a part of today's narrative. Ignoring the signs is like playing a game of Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. The story of Rome is a study in ambition, hubris, and the inevitable consequences of ignoring the warning signs. It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires can fall, not with a bang, but with a whimper. As we look to the future, let's take a leaf out of the history book and remember that the lessons of the past are there to guide us, not to haunt us. So, as you drift off to sleep, dream of empires rising and falling, of lessons learned and forgotten. And remember, history isn't just a record of what happened. It's a mirror reflecting our own potential paths. With any luck, we'll choose the ones that lead to resilience, stability, and harmony, rather than repeating the mistakes of those who came before. Sweet dreams, history buffs.